Xiao Tiangyong woke in 1976 with nothing but a name. Hours later, one dead rabbit became 100 inside his mind. No family record existed, so even his identity could become dangerous. Li Hongbing had rescued him, but kindness alone could not create paperwork. Tiangyong's hidden space multiplied his personal kills exactly 100 times. The copies remained stored where nobody else could ever see them. That first rabbit proved hunger no longer had to control him. If he secured papers and a gun, poverty could become opportunity. The room itself offered no comfort. A straw mattress, patchlet, pint, smoky walls, one crooked table, and almost nothing worth calling furniture. Before sleeping, Tiangyong had known electricity, concrete walls, and modern life. Now every object around him belonged to another generation. A damaged window frame crumbled when he touched it, and the noise brought Li Hongbing and the village accountant Lu rushing inside. Tiangyong asked the only question that mattered, and Li gave him the date. September 22nd, 1976. The answer hit harder than the broken room. Economic reform was still years away, and he had landed in the rural northeast. Li and accountant Lu assumed he had been sent down from a city, failed to endure country life, and somehow ended up in the river. Tiangyong could not explain time travel without sounding insane, so he chose the safest lie available and claimed his memory was gone. He kept only his name, acted disoriented, and let the two older men build a believable explanation around him. The performance worked well enough that they stepped next door to discuss what could be done with this apparently homeless young man. Accountant Lu floated an ugly marriage arrangement involving a sick relative and a sickly daughter who was considered unlucky. Li Hongbing rejected the idea immediately. Whatever Tiangyong's past was, the team leader refused to trade a confused stranger into someone else's scheme. That response told Tiangyong something important. Before he knew anything else about the village, Li Hongbing had a decent moral line. While the men argued next door, a gray shape darted across the floor and triggered instincts Tiangyong had trained for years. In his previous life, he had been a competitive shooter and gold medalist, so moving targets still pulled his attention automatically. He snapped up a broken piece of brick, judged the distance, and flicked it before the animal could disappear. The fragment struck cleanly. What looked like a mouse turned out to be a tiny rabbit, dead with one precise hit. Then a transparent storage space appeared inside his awareness, and the single rabbit outside was suddenly joined by 100 identical rabbits within. Tiangyong checked the count twice, because the result sounded too absurd, even to a man who had already traveled through time. The space held roughly 10 cubic meters, small compared with a warehouse, but enormous compared with the empty room around him. He immediately wondered whether the multiplication applied only to animals, or to anything he personally collected, killed, or harvested. Before he could test that theory, Li and accountant Lu returned, noticed the rabbit, and became far more interested in his accuracy. Li studied the tiny wound, then the brick fragment, and realized the amnesiac stranger had killed a rabbit with one throw. Tiangyong downplayed the feat and gave them the rabbit instead of keeping it, choosing goodwill over one meal. For men living where meat was rare, that gift carried more weight than any speech about gratitude could have done. Li promised him food in return, while accountant Lu looked at the rabbit as if the village had just received a holiday gift. Later, Li Hongbing's teenage son, Yuan Xiao, arrived with cornmeal buns and strips of pickled vegetables. The meal was rough enough to punish modern taste buds, but Tiangyong noticed Yuan Xiao staring at it with obvious hunger. He offered to share. The boy refused because his father had ordered him to deliver the food, not take any of it. That small refusal showed how scarce food really was, and how seriously the Li family treated a promise to a stranger. Yuan Xiao explained that Li and accountant Lu were checking nearby villages and camps for anyone who had reported a missing youth. Tiangyong already knew the search would fail. No household file, work unit, or family in this era could possibly claim him. That meant his problem was larger than amnesia. In 1976, a person with no official identity could attract dangerous suspicion. A future-born stranger wandering into a northern production team might be treated as anything from a fugitive to a spy. Going to a city would not solve it. Real sent-down youth struggled for years to leave the countryside, even with legitimate records. Tiangyong therefore made a practical decision: stay in Shungan village, build roots, and wait for the future he knew was coming. The villagers had rescued and fed him without demanding anything first, which made this poor place safer than any unknown city office. Yuan Xiao became his guide and walked him through the fields, yards, and narrow paths that made up the small production team. The boy knew every family, every tree, and every petty village story, turning a simple walk into a full local briefing. Golden grain bent in the breeze, beautiful from a distance and frightening once Tiangyong understood how little surplus these families actually had. When Yuan Shao mentioned a nearby river, Tiangyong's attention shifted from scenery to protein and another chance to test the multiplier. At the riverbank, he noticed a young woman washing clothes in plain blue work clothes, her pale face partly hidden by her hair. Her name was Lin Yuing, though Tiangyong learned that only after a water snake changed the entire scene. The snake slid close to her feet, and Yuing stumbled backward in panic as it raised itself to strike. Tiangyong was too far away for another brick throw, but Yuanshao carried a slingshot at his belt. He took it, loaded a pebble, measured the moving target, and released one shot directly into the snake's vulnerable point. The snake dropped before reaching Yuing, and Yuan Shuxiao stared at the slingshot as if it had transformed into a firearm. Tiangyong checked his hidden space and found 100 water snakes added beside the rabbits. That confirmed the core rule beyond doubt. A first personal kill could be multiplied 100 times. He kept his reaction under control, picked up the real snake, and asked Yuan Shao a far more immediate question. Was it edible? Yuan Shao's expression answered before his words did. In this village, a dead water snake was not a curiosity. It was dinner. Yuing thanked Tiangyong quietly, still pale from the scare, while he finally got a closer look at the girl Li would later warn him about. She was strikingly pretty, but Tiangyong's attention kept returning to the food value now waiting inside his storage space. Li Hongbing called from across the fields, ending the encounter before Tiangyong could ask Yuing much more. On the walk back, Yuan Shao carried the snake proudly, already treating Tiangyong as the man who could bring meat home. Li took one glance at the kill and immediately connected it to the rabbit, Tiangyong's accuracy, and the practical value of such skill. Yuan Shao's retold the rescue with enough excitement to make one slingshot shot sound like a battlefield victory. Then Li pulled Tiangyong aside and warned him to stay away from Lin Yuing without explaining the full reason. Yuan Shao clearly hated that warning, but one look from his father ended the argument before village gossip could take over. At Li's house, Tiangyong met Wang Suhua, Li Hongbing's warm, direct wife, who treated him like a younger relative almost immediately. He gave her the snake to cook, and Yuan Shao made sure everyone knew his slingshot had been involved in the rescue. That accidental contribution helped the boy win permission to keep using the slingshot his mother had wanted him to abandon. More important news followed. Li and accountant Liu had checked every nearby team in the commune youth office. No one reported a missing man matching Tiangyong's description, exactly as he had expected. Li promised to keep searching upstream because he still believed the river must have carried Tiangyong from somewhere. Instead of letting the search drag on, Tiangyong asked whether he could simply remain in Shungan if no family was found. Li tried not to look too pleased, then warned him that the village was poor enough for work points to be worth only a few cents. A full day of farm labor might earn 20 cents, hardly enough to tempt a real city youth to stay voluntarily. Tiangyong had 100 rabbits, 100 snakes, and knowledge of the future. Work point value was not his main concern. He asked to register his household in Shungan village, turning a desperate identity problem into his first long-term commitment. Li agreed with obvious relief, but he still handled the matter properly, instead of taking advantage of Tiangyong's confusion. Suhua served water snake soup while the paperwork was being arranged, and the rich broth almost erased Tiangyong's memory of the cornmeal buns. Yuan Shao's attacked his bowl at a speed that revealed how rarely the family could eat meat. The boy's earlier refusal to touch Tiangyong's lunch suddenly looked even more impressive. By sunset, Tiangyong had official household registration in Shungan, which removed the most dangerous uncertainty around his existence. The new registration did not erase Tiangyong's strange arrival, but it changed the question villagers asked from who is he to what work can he do. That distinction mattered because a registered resident belonged to a production team, received ration channels, and could stop living under constant identity suspicion. At the youth office, Li pushed one advantage further by arguing that Tiangyong should receive temporary newcomer rations. The clerk wanted to treat him as someone who had already consumed his state allowance somewhere else. Li countered that nobody could produce any record proving that assumption. After enough arguing, the office granted 45 jin of rice per month for 4 months, plus a small soybean oil allowance. Pork could not be issued because the store had none, so Tiangyong received a meat coupon instead. The paper coupon looked almost comical to someone from a future full of supermarkets, yet everyone around him treated it as valuable property. Tiangyong learned quickly not to laugh at anything that represented calories. The abandoned youth building gave him another form of wealth that would have been invisible in his old life. Private spaces. Several former sent-down youths had once slept there together, but most had already found ways back toward the cities. The result was a building too large for one man and too neglected for anyone to envy yet. One table leaned enough to spill a bowl. The chairs wobbled, and dust filled every corner. Tiangyong still preferred it to sharing a crowded kang with an entire household. Privacy also meant he could experiment with the hidden space without someone watching every movement. That benefit became more important each time the multiplier created quantities no normal hunter could explain. He tested whether the stored animals spoiled and found the space preserved them far better than ordinary room temperature should have allowed. The discovery removed one of his earliest fears about waking to the smell of 100 rotten rabbits inside his own mind. It also meant he could stockpile meat rather than sell or cook everything immediately. In a shortage economy, preservation was nearly as valuable as multiplication. Yuan Shao kept returning after chores, partly because his father sent him, and partly because Tiangyong's strange skills fascinated him. The teenager wore patched clothes without embarrassment, because almost every child in Shangan looked similar. What stood out were his sharp eyes, quick memory, and willingness to work before asking what he would receive. Tiangyong began seeing why Li trusted the boy with errands beyond his age. He also noticed how every conversation eventually returned to food. A new bird, fish, or animal was first classified by one simple village question: can it be eaten? That mindset looked crude only until Tiangyong watched families stretch grain through the month. Hunger had turned practical knowledge into a survival language. The river therefore became more than scenery after the snake rescue. Tiangyong studied its depth, reed cover, fish activity, and distance from houses as possible hunting and storage cover. Yuan Shao supplied local knowledge faster than Tiangyong could ask, pointing out where children gathered eggs and where adults set crude fish traps. Most easy resources had already been harvested heavily. That explained why one rabbit or snake could create such excitement in homes surrounded by open land. The countryside looked abundant from a distance, but every edible patch had generations of human competition behind it. Ewing fit into that environment strangely. She moved quietly enough to disappear from gatherings and seemed practiced at making herself small around other people. Yuan Shao's explanation about the Jinx label gave Tiangyong a reason for that behavior without turning her into a helpless figure. She still worked, gathered food, washed clothes, and found ways to thank people despite the way her family treated her. What worried him more was the shared illness with her older brother. Two siblings showing similar symptoms suggested something physical, not supernatural. Tiangyong had modern common sense but no medical training, so he refused to pretend he knew a cure. For now, food and safety were the only things he could reliably improve. That restraint mattered, because his future knowledge could become dangerous if he started believing it made him an expert in every field. His real expertise remained shooting. Even without a firearm, the slingshot and thrown brick proved that distance calculation, lead, and hand control survived time travel intact. The hidden multiplier amplified that single skill into an economic system. A normal hunter might spend all day for one rabbit. Tiangyong could spend all day for one rabbit and privately receive 100. That gap shaped every plan he made from then on. He did not need to dominate village workpoint rankings. He needed legal access to hunting, discreet buyers, and enough discipline not to expose impossible output. The black market became attractive for exactly that reason. Official channels could pay fairly, but repeated large deliveries from one young newcomer would create records and questions. Private trading offered flexibility at the cost of trust and risk. Tiangyong decided to build both kinds of relationships, rather than depend on either one. Song Jinzi would later become the private channel. Wang Yutian and Frozen Creek would become the cleaner public-facing route. Li Hongbing, meanwhile, gave him legitimacy inside Shungan. Those three relationships solved different problems and were valuable precisely because they did not overlap completely. Tiangyong also began keeping mental track of what could expose the multiplier. Identical animal bodies were one danger. Unexplained storage was another danger he had to manage carefully. Producing fresh meat without visible hunting trips was a third. That was why he kept baskets, grass covers, and ordinary tools around even when the hidden space made them unnecessary. A believable life required believable inconvenience. Sometimes he still walked miles, carrying things he could hide instantly, because being seen doing normal work was part of protecting the secret. Yuan Shao never questioned these habits. To him, his new master was simply an unusually capable hunter who kept finding food. Tiangyong preferred that interpretation, and had no intention of upgrading the boy's understanding. Even gratitude had to be managed carefully. Giving the Li family meat repaid real kindness, but giving too much too quickly could make generosity look impossible. He therefore let meals, tools, and favors move both directions. Li supplied paperwork and daily necessities. Suhua supplied cooking, warmth, and ordinary household stability. Yuanxiao supplied labor, village knowledge, and eventually hunting support. Tiangyong supplied game. Whenever his hunting produced something useful, the exchange slowly turned rescue charity into a relationship where everyone contributed something meaningful. That balance made Shungan feel less like a hiding place and more like a community he could actually join. The youth office initially tried to classify him as an older sent-down youth, which would have cost him several months of government rations. Li argued until the office granted 4 months of supplies instead: rice, a little oil, and a meat coupon because pork was unavailable. The ration was modest by modern standards but enormous to someone whose hidden space could turn one successful hunt into 100 copies. Lai also placed him in the abandoned youth housing, where most former sent-down residents had already returned to cities. The building was crooked, dusty, and nearly empty, but Tiangyong now had a private room and legal place to sleep. Yuanxiao arrived with brooms, cloths, an enamel basin, and other cleaning tools before Tiangyong even asked for help. Together they scrubbed the room, kitchen, and yard until the abandoned quarters became livable rather than merely survivable. Every favor from the Li family deepened Tiangyong's sense that he needed to repay them with more than polite thanks. He casually promised Yuanxiao more snake meat the next day, nearly stopping the boy's brain with excitement. Then Tiangyong finally asked why Li had warned him away from Lin Yuing. Yuanxiao's anger returned immediately. The village called Yuing a jinx because illness had followed her family for years. Her older brother had become seriously sick after she was born, and nobody had ever identified the cause. When Yuing later developed similar symptoms, superstition replaced common sense and the blame fell entirely on her. Her own parents stopped using her proper name and treated the girl as if she carried misfortune wherever she went. Yuanxiao could not understand why nobody considered that two siblings with the same sickness might simply share a hereditary condition. Tiangyong reached the same conclusion. Whatever the illness was, 1976 offered very limited diagnosis and treatment. The story made Yuing's quiet gratitude at the river feel heavier. She was sick, isolated, and blamed for a problem she never caused. Tiangyong could not cure an unknown disease, so he filed the matter away and focused on a problem he could actually solve. He asked Yuanxiao whether Shungan had any serious hunters, because food multiplication mattered most if he could hunt consistently. Yuanxiao proudly named Wang Qingshan, a local man everyone called the Hunter King. The title sounded legendary until Tiangyong learned it was partly a joke around Wang's surname and reputation. Wang Qingshan claimed to have killed a wild boar years earlier, though nobody in the village had actually witnessed it. Even so, he ate meat more often than most families, which was enough to make him impressive in a hungry production team. Yuanxiao then asked whether Tiangyong could hunt if someone gave him a gun. Tiangyong answered carefully that shooting was one of the few skills he could still remember with confidence. That was technically true. His modern competitive career had built reflexes that remained intact even after every other part of his identity vanished. The problem was equipment. A slingshot worked on snakes and birds, but serious mountain game required a firearm. Yuanxiao knew one possible source. His uncle Wang Yuqian owned a 16-gauge shotgun and guarded it closely. The uncle also loved good liquor, which suggested a simple exchange if Tiangyong could obtain something worth offering. Tiangyong had no liquor coupons, but Yuanxiao knew the local black market and believed game meat could be traded there. That created Tiangyong's first real economic plan: convert multiplied animals into saleable meat, trade the meat for liquor, then borrow a gun. Li returned later with bedding, a cup, toothbrush, towel matches, and other basics Tiangyong had not yet been able to buy. By the end of his first day, Tiangyong possessed papers, housing, rations, hidden food, and a practical route toward becoming a hunter. The next morning, he exercised out of habit, then pulled 2 water snakes from the hidden space, and prepared a plain breakfast soup. The kitchen lacked proper seasoning, but fresh meat still smelled good enough to guide Yuanxiao straight into the courtyard. The boy tried to refuse a bowl, insisting they could search for snakes together later, instead of eating Tiangyong's supply. When Tiangyong claimed he had already caught 2 more that morning, Yuanxiao stared at the pot as if the village had produced a miracle. Then the teenager dropped to his knees and asked Tiangyong to accept him as a disciple. Tiangyong thought the request was ridiculous. He could teach shooting form, but no lesson could reproduce the hidden multiplier in his mind. Yuanxiao refused to stand until he received an answer, and even promised to care for Tiangyong when the older man became elderly. The stubborn performance eventually won. Tiangyong accepted him informally and immediately ordered his new disciple to sit down and eat. The new title changed nothing practical, but it gave Yuan Xiao a reason to follow training instructions with almost religious enthusiasm. They stabilized a wobbly table with a stone, then shared rice and snake soup while discussing the black market. Yuan Xiao explained that enforcement had softened compared with earlier years, and rural trading now operated more like an unofficial market. People exchanged grain, ration tickets, tools, food, and occasionally weapons if they knew the right contacts. Then Yuan Xiao revealed that the state supply cooperative itself sold firearms when stock was available. Tiangyong remembered that broad firearm restrictions belonged to a later era, but remembering that fact did not solve all of his empty wallet. A legal shotgun still cost more money than he possessed, which turned the black market from curiosity into necessity. After breakfast, Yuan Xiao washed dishes while Tiangyong carried a bamboo basket and machete toward the river. The river had already been picked almost clean by nearby villagers, leaving tiny fish and weeds instead of profitable game. Tiangyong therefore found a secluded spot and withdrew 10 rabbits and 20 snakes from his hidden inventory. The quantity was excellent. The appearance was dangerous because every multiplied rabbit looked exactly alike. 10 identical carcasses might make experienced traders ask questions Tiangyong could never answer safely. He decided to process the animals before selling them, expecting to spend a bloody afternoon with the machete. Instead, the hidden space responded to his thoughts. The knife moved inside it, as if invisible hands were controlling the blade. Rabbits could be skinned, snakes cleaned, and meat separated without Tiangyong physically touching the work. The discovery gave the space a second major function. Beyond storage and multiplication, mental processing. He pushed the ability too far on the first attempt and paid for it with a crushing headache, blurred vision, and near collapse. That limit mattered. The space consumed mental energy, so efficiency would be essential if he ever processed larger animals. Once recovered enough to walk, Tiangyong hid the cleaned meat beneath grass and branches and carried the basket back towards Shungan. Villagers greeted him warmly because Li Hongbing had already told everyone. The strange city youth had chosen to register locally, in a place where younger people dreamed of leaving. Someone voluntarily joining the village felt like an unexpected compliment. Yuan Xiaoxiao waited at the youth quarters, assumed the covered basket held firewood, then nearly shouted when Tiangyong revealed the meat. Tiangyong filled a large bowl for Li Hongbing and Su Hua before discussing any sale. Yuan Xiao ran the gift home like a courier protecting treasure, ignoring friends who called to him on the road. That gesture was deliberate. Tiangyong could multiply food, but the Li family had spent real scarce resources helping him first. After Yuan Xiao returned, the two set out for the black market with the remaining meat hidden inside the basket. The market sat far enough from normal roads that Tiangyong would never have found it without his teenage guide. They arrived late, after many sellers had already packed up, which suited Tiangyong because this first visit was mostly reconnaissance. A woman asked whether he was buying or selling, heard that he wanted cash, tickets, and grain, then vanished without explanation. Yuan Xiao steered him toward a better contact, Song Jinzi, a middle-aged broker known for arranging larger private trades. Song's large facial mole and polished merchant smile made him easy to identify before he even opened his mouth. He asked whether Tiangyong was buying or selling. Tiangyong answered that he intended to do both. That response earned real interest because ordinary villagers usually arrived with one small need, not a list of transactions. Tiangyong wanted money, ration tickets, and high-quality liquor, all without explaining where he came from or who employed him. Song agreed, then asked the only question that mattered to a merchant: what could Tiangyong offer in return? Tiangyong opened the basket and revealed a clean pile of processed rabbit and snake meat. Song immediately guessed that his masked customer was an experienced hunter who had stumbled onto an unusually productive spot. Tiangyong let the assumption stand. A hunter with secrets was far safer than a time traveler with magical copies. The meat weighed 6 jin of rabbit and 2.5 jin of snake, enough to make the first transaction worthwhile. Song produced 2 bottles of premium local liquor and added 15 jin worth of grain tickets to balance the deal. Song's first deal also taught Tiangyong how much processed meat changed the conversation. A whole rabbit invited questions about where it had been caught and whether several animals looked suspiciously alike. Boneless cuts looked like merchandise instead of evidence. That difference justified the mental effort required to prepare game inside the hidden space. Song weighed carefully because reputation mattered more than squeezing one new customer for a few extra fen. Yuan Xiao watched the scale closely and gave Tiangyong tiny signals whenever a price or ticket bundle matched local expectations. For all his appetite and impulsiveness, the teenager understood village trade better than Tiangyong did. That made him useful in markets where modern instincts could be misleading. Tiangyong knew the future price of many things in broad terms, But those memories did not tell him today's fair exchange for snake meat. Yuan Xiao understood those local exchange rates instinctively from village life. The black market also revealed which goods carried social value beyond their stated price. Good liquor could unlock Wang Yutian's cooperation. Canned peaches could make a household remember a favor for months. Malted milk powder mattered to families with children and sick relatives. Cigarettes functioned almost like portable appreciation among older men. Tiangyong began buying with relationships in mind instead of simply stocking his own shelves. The approach fit his situation because he already had more food hidden away than one person could consume. What he lacked were doors into other people's trust. Every small gift needed to remain proportionate enough not to look like bribery or unexplained wealth. That was why the Li family received meat repeatedly, but not mountains of it. It was also why Tiangyong brought Wang Yutian items the cook personally valued, rather than arriving with an absurd amount of cash. His future business depended on people wanting to deal with him again after the novelty of one successful hunt faded. Song Jinzi understood the same principle from the merchant side. The broker did not ask for Tiangyong's real name during the first exchange. He did not demand proof of where the animals came from. He concentrated on weight, condition, payment, and whether the masked seller would return. That professional silence earned Tiangyong's confidence more effectively than friendliness would have. By the second large transaction, Song had become one of the few people Tiangyong trusted to source ammunition without asking dangerous questions. The trust still had limits. Tiangyong never showed him the hidden space, never delivered identical whole animals, and never explained why stock remained fresh. Song never received enough information to betray the real secret, even if their relationship failed later. That separation between trust and exposure became another operating rule. A useful partner did not need access to everything. The same principle would later shape his arrangement with Wang Yutian. Wang needed to know how much meat was coming and when. He did not need to know where 7 matching boars originated. Sister Jiang needed to know which legal goods Tiangyong wanted. She did not need to know what disappeared into a space after he left the store. Li Hongbing needed enough truth to defend Tiangyong as a resident. He did not need a story about time travel. By giving each person only the information required for their role, Tiangyong made the impossible look like several ordinary relationships instead of one giant secret. Yuan Xiao gave a subtle sign that the exchange was fair, confirming Song's reputation for protecting long-term business relationships. Tiangyong also traded a smaller batch of grain tickets for cash, leaving the market with his first real money in 1976. More important than the money was the contact. Song Jinzi could become a discreet channel for whatever hunting produced next. On the walk home, Yuan Xiao reminded Tiangyong that Wang Yutian worked at Frozen Creek Lumber Camp and only returned on Sundays. It was Thursday, giving Tiangyong 2 days to prepare a gift strong enough to loosen the uncle's grip on his shotgun. Near a reed marsh, rustling caught Tiangyong's attention, and he motioned Yuan Xiao to stop. He entered quietly with the slingshot ready, expecting birds or another small animal worth multiplying. Instead, he found Lin Yuing lying in the grass with 2 tiny quail eggs resting in her hand. Before either could explain the awkward meeting, 3 pintail snipes burst from the reeds in different directions. Tiangyong reacted before embarrassment could slow him. One stone dropped the first bird, the second cut off another escape line. A third shot struck the last bird in flight, leaving 3 kills from 3 rapid releases. Yuan Xiao shouted from outside the reeds, while Yuing stared at Tiangyong with a mixture of relief and surprise. The birds had solved an uncomfortable misunderstanding. Yuing realized he had entered the reeds to hunt, not follow her. As she prepared to leave, Yuan Xiao noticed the mud on her clothes and casually warned that her parents might scold her. Yuing's expression suggested the truth hurt more. Her family cared far less about the mud than a normal family would. Then she stopped beside Tiangyong and held out the 2 quail eggs. She had searched the marsh specifically because she wanted something, anything, to thank him for saving her from the snake. The gift was tiny in market value and enormous in meaning. Because Yuing had almost nothing she could call her own, Tiangyong accepted it warmly instead of embarrassing her with refusal, and the tension in her face eased for a moment. When he stored the eggs, the multiplier activated again. 2 personally collected eggs became 200 inside the hidden space. The 3 snipes produced 300 copies as well, pushing the small storage area closer to its limit. Yuan Xiao praised the birds as excellent meat and wanted to cook them immediately. Tiangyong insisted on waiting until dinner because the rabbit and snake meat already delivered to Li's house needed to be eaten first. He disguised that practical reason behind a fake hometown, saying about eating birds at night for good fortune. Yuan Xiao accepted the invented proverb without hesitation, giving Tiangyong one more reminder of how seriously the boy treated his new master. That evening, Li's house served a feast by village standards: buns, braised snipe, rabbit, snake soup, eggplant, and beans. Accountant Lu stared at the table until Li explained that most of the meat had come from Tiangyong. The accountant's opinion of the newcomer changed immediately. 2 days in Shungan had already produced more meat than many families saw in weeks. During dinner, Li asked what kind of work Tiangyong wanted to do, now that he was officially registered. Tiangyong answered that his remembered shooting skill made hunting the most sensible choice. Li and accountant Lu exchanged the look of men who had just heard the answer they wanted, but still needed to act responsibly. Shungan was chronically short of meat, yet hunting meant danger and fewer agricultural work points if Tiangyong failed to produce results. Li warned that mountain animals could kill a careless hunter and that lost farm labor would reduce Tiangyong's year-end grain share. Tiangyong accepted the risk. With his multiplier, one successful hunt could matter more than weeks of field labor. Li agreed to take him to the Forestry Bureau for a hunter's license, giving Tiangyong a legal path toward using firearms. The only remaining question was whether a licensed hunter could get a gun before hunger, money, or opportunity forced him into riskier shortcuts. 2 days later, Tiangyong had the hunter's license, but the Forestry Bureau had no firearm available to issue him. Officials promised to prioritize him when stock returned, a promise useful on paper and useless for anyone who wanted to hunt now. That left Wang Yutian's shotgun as the only realistic route. So Tiangyong prepared carefully for the Sunday visit. Before then, he returned to Songjinzi with a larger load: rabbit, snakes, and pintail snipes processed inside the hidden space. Song handled the deal professionally and paid in grain tickets, oil tickets, assorted food tickets, cash, and several luxury canned goods. Tiangyong bought 2 cans of malted milk powder and 3 cans of peaches, items rare enough to function almost like social currency. He set aside 2 bottles of premium liquor, 2 snipes, 2 rabbits, milk powder, and peaches for Wang Yutian. Borrowing a valuable gun from a cautious relative required more than asking nicely, and Tiangyong intended to show respect for the risk. Reaching Frozen Creek Lumber Camp required a bicycle, and only accountant Lu's household owned one in the entire village. Lu had gone into debt so his eldest son could commute to school, making the bicycle almost as important as a family asset. Tiangyong brought a can of peaches as thanks, and Lu tried to refuse while his younger children stared at it with painful longing. The gift stayed. Tiangyong took the bicycle and left without knowing the small luxury would trigger an argument after he departed. Lu's second son, Qingyan, complained that the eldest always received the best resources, even when education offered no guaranteed future. For once, accountant Lu had no easy answer, because the resentment came from years of unequal sacrifice, not one can of peaches. Tiangyong knew none of that while pedaling toward Frozen Creek with Yuan Shao riding behind him and the gift basket tied securely. Wang Yutian emerged from his house as a broad, slightly stooped man, with a heavy burn scar along his left cheek. He had worked as a cook since his teens, and his trained nose identified the premium liquor before the basket was even opened. That skill explained why Yuan Shao called his uncle almost impossible to fool around food or drink. Wang noticed the boy calling Tiangyong master, and looked understandably skeptical about what a man in his 20s could teach a teenager. Tiangyong introduced himself as the newly registered hunter from Shungan and let Yuan Shao's enthusiasm remain unexplained. Inside the house, Tiangyong finally saw the object that had driven the entire visit. A 16-gauge converted shotgun hung on the wall, modified to fire 7.62mm ammunition 1 round at a time. For an ordinary hunter, the single-shot action was slow. For a former competitive marksman, it was a challenge Tiangyong knew how to manage. Wang caught him staring and asked whether he liked guns and knew how to handle one. Tiangyong answered yes to both, keeping his tone calm, while his attention measured the weapon's balance, action, and condition. Wang then asked about his background, so Tiangyong repeated the amnesia story with enough uncertainty to fit what Shungan already believed. Yuan Shao's listened with genuine sadness, which almost made Tiangyong feel guilty for how thoroughly the village had accepted his cover. Then Tiangyong opened the basket and stopped pretending the visit was casual. The liquor, game meat, milk powder, and peaches were all offered directly to Wang as a gift. Wang refused at first because the value was far beyond ordinary hospitality, even while his attention kept returning to the basket. Tiangyong spared both men the performance and admitted the obvious truth: he wanted to borrow the shotgun. The request immediately changed Wang's expression, because lending a firearm made the owner responsible for whatever happened afterward. Tiangyong understood the hesitation and offered no pressure beyond the gifts already sitting between them. Wang finally agreed under written conditions: hunting only, no pointing at people, no lending it onward, and a 2-month limit. Yuan Xiao helpfully noted that his uncle had announced 3 rules and somehow produced 4. Wang silenced him with one look while Tiangyong signed the agreement before the discussion could somehow create a 5th. The gun was worth several hundred yuan, far beyond Tiangyong's current means, so a temporary loan was already a major advantage. Wang lifted it from the wall and placed it in Tiangyong's hands with the care of someone transferring a family heirloom. The weapon had originally come from a lumber camp coworker and had rarely been used, which explained its unusual conversion. Yuan Xiao immediately suggested his uncle simply give the gun away permanently. Wang refused so quickly that even Tiangyong laughed. Generosity had limits, especially in a household raising 3 children alone. Wang invited them to lunch, probably expecting the polite refusal common to rural visits. Yuan Xiao's accepted instantly and praised his uncle's cooking loudly enough to make withdrawing the invitation socially impossible. The trapped cook took the gifted meat into the kitchen, while Tiangyong quietly respected the boy's shameless effectiveness. Before lunch, 3 of Wang's sons appeared one after another and turned the house into controlled chaos. The youngest, Dan, challenged the stranger holding his father's gun before Yuan Xiao grabbed his ear and forced an apology. Dasha, around 12, rushed in ready to defend his younger brother, while older Daming stayed half-hidden behind the doorway. Their personalities were different, but the smell from the kitchen united all 3 boys immediately. Tiangyong asked why a camp cook's children reacted to meat like they had not seen it in weeks. Yuan Xiao explained that Wang's wife had died years earlier, leaving him to raise 3 growing sons on one salary. Working around food did not mean he could take enough home to feed a household, especially when meat itself remained tightly rationed. The explanation changed Tiangyong's view of Wang's carefulness with money. What looked stingy from outside was mostly survival. Lunch arrived as an iron pot stew of rabbit snipe, potatoes, glass noodles, and wild mushrooms. The cooking was far beyond anything Tiangyong could manage, and the first bite justified every boast Yuan Xiao had made. Wang poured the premium liquor, which burned hard enough to remind Tiangyong that rural hospitality could be physically aggressive. The 4 boys attacked the stew with such speed that Tiangyong found himself reaching into a pot already stripped nearly clean. He settled for corn cake and liquor rather than compete with hungry children over the final pieces. Then Wang mentioned something far more valuable than lunch. Frozen Creek Lumber Camp purchased game meat from private hunters. The camp paid well because privately sourced meat avoided the same ration ticket problem that limited normal purchases. Tiangyong immediately asked for an introduction, but Wang had already consumed enough liquor to lose the battle with consciousness. He collapsed face first on the table before giving any details, leaving Tiangyong with a business opportunity and no transaction route. The conversation would have to wait. The shotgun, at least, was already in Tiangyong's possession. The next morning became the first serious hunting day of his new life. Wang had included 50 rounds of ammunition, more than enough for a careful hunter and not nearly enough to waste. Yuan Xiao wanted wild boar because the animals regularly damaged village crops, and because he remembered the rare pork from the previous year's kill. Tiangyong saw the same target through different math. 1 boar personally killed could mean 100 stored boars. He allowed Yuan Xiao to come under strict orders to obey instantly and stay back whenever an animal was found. They entered Mountain Ridge and spent hours finding almost nothing. Not even fresh droppings. The emptiness was frustrating, but Tiangyong knew wild boar was not harmless prey that should be chased carelessly. A mature male could charge like a compact vehicle, absorb poor shots, and maul a person before a second round was loaded. Eventually, Tiangyong noticed an oily rub mark on an old poplar trunk with coarse bristle hair caught against the bark. He showed Yuan Xiao how the color, hair, and freshness indicated a male boar had rubbed there not long earlier. Yuan Xiao immediately accused his supposedly amnesiac master of knowing far more hunting than he admitted. Tiangyong recovered with a partial truth, claiming fragments of lessons from his grandfather were returning around guns and hunting. In his old life, his grandfather really had taken him hunting, which made the lie easier to carry. They searched until midday without another useful sign, and finally stopped in the shade to eat corn cakes. Yuan Xiao suddenly announced an urgent need to relieve himself and walked toward a shallow, brush-covered depression. A moment later, the depression moved. The teenager looked down and realized a huge black boar had been sleeping almost directly beneath the place he had chosen. Worse, Yuan Xiao had just urinated on its head. The boar came awake in a violent burst, while Yuan Xiao ran toward Tiangyong with his belt barely secured and panic destroying every trace of dignity. After hours of careful searching, the boy had found their target in the most insulting way physically possible. Tiangyong heard the crashing brush, saw the size of the animal, and stopped finding the situation funny. The boar was several hundred pounds of muscle and dried mud, closing on Yuan Xiao much faster than the teenager could escape. A flat shot from ground level risked striking the thick skull or armored shoulder at a poor angle. Tiangyong spotted a rock ledge roughly 3 meters high and climbed it for a downward line into the chest. Yuan Xiao kept running, while the boar gained, tusks grinding and black body driving through brush without slowing. For several seconds, pure fear gave the boy enough speed to stretch the gap. Then his foot slipped, and he crashed forward onto the ground. The boar was almost on top of him when Tiangyong fired. First shot hit hard. Tiangyong worked the single-shot action, reloaded, reacquired the target, and fired again. He repeated the sequence a third time so quickly the separate shots nearly blended together. All 3 rounds struck the same vital area from above, punching through protection that a weaker angle might not have defeated. The boar collapsed less than 5 meters from Yuan Xiao and did not rise again. For a few seconds the teenager stayed face down, as if his mind had not yet accepted that he was still alive. Tiangyong climbed down and told him to check the animal, partly to force him out of the shock. Yuan Xiao took the machete, approached carefully, confirmed the boar was dead, then began kicking the carcass in furious revenge. The reaction was ridiculous but useful. Fear had not broken the boy's nerve, and he recovered faster than Tiangyong expected. When Yuan Xiao calmed down, his first serious question concerned the 3 rapid shots from a weapon that held only 1 round. Tiangyong promised to teach him the reloading technique later and sent him to start butchering instead. That gave Tiangyong privacy to deal with a much larger problem inside his own head. One dead wild boar had created 100 copies, and the original 10 cubic meter storage space could not contain them comfortably. Pressure built behind his eyes, as if the hidden space itself were being crushed by the mass. Tiangyong focused on one desperate command: expand. The space responded, growing from roughly 10 cubic meters to 100. The upgrade solved the volume problem by consuming stored material as fuel. Every rabbit vanished. Every snake vanished. Every snipe vanished. And 90 of the 100 copied boars disappeared as well. Tiangyong had lost nearly his entire inventory in exchange for a storage area 10 times larger. The loss hurt until he tested the upgraded control and realized mental processing had become faster, broader, and less clumsy. He still retained 10 complete wild boars, enough meat to dwarf everything he had traded so far. Yuan Xiao, unaware of the hidden transformation, continued attacking the real carcass with a dull machete that barely cut through the hardened exterior. The boar weighed too much for 2 people to carry, and field processing with their poor knife would take hours. Tiangyong decided to return for help and compensate every family that sent labor with a proper share of meat. He chose Li Hongbing and accountant Lu first, because both households had supported him from the moment he arrived. Yuan Xiao suggested leaving someone to guard the carcass. Tiangyong rejected that, after nearly watching the boy die minutes earlier. Before leaving, Tiangyong stabbed beneath the chest to drain blood, though the tough layers made the work rough and incomplete. He covered the head and exposed areas with branches against birds, then hurried back toward Shungan with Yuan Xiao. Unknown to them, another hunter carrying a Type 56 rifle reached the site after they left and found the unattended boar. Back in the village, Li Hongbing and accountant Lu were already discussing wild boar for a different reason. Nearby teams had reported herds damaging crops, and harvest was close enough that one bad raid could erase months of labor. Li worried Shungan lacked competent hunters. Accountant Lu named Wang Qingshan, the Qin brothers, and Tiangyong as possible help. Li dismissed the list with painful realism. Qingshan's famous boar was ancient history. The Qin brothers were mediocre, and Tiangyong barely had a gun. Then Yuan Xiao burst into the courtyard, carrying a blood-covered machete. Li saw the blade, saw his filthy son's scratches, and briefly assumed something far worse than hunting had happened. He grabbed his pipe and moved toward Yuan Xiao until accountant Lu forced the boy to explain. Yuan Xiao blurted that he and his master had killed a wild boar. Both men immediately asked where Tiangyong was, interpreting Yuan Xiao's appearance as evidence the older hunter had been badly hurt. Tiangyong walked in behind him without a scratch and ended that fear before it could grow. He explained the rub mark, the search, Yuan Xiao's accidental discovery, the chase, and the 3-shot kill. Li's face changed most at the part where his only son had been running from several hundred pounds of charging boar. The relief lasted until Yuan Xiao proudly announced that the animal had not even been able to catch him. Li picked up a stick and began beating the remaining pride out of the boy with terrified parental fury. Accountant Lu did not interfere beyond preventing anything excessive, because he understood what almost losing an only child meant. When the punishment ended, Lu asked the practical question everyone could finally consider: where was the meat? Tiangyong explained that the carcass still sat on the mountain and required several adults to carry. The promise of a share sent accountant Liu home for his second son, with more speed than any village meeting ever achieved. Lai put down the stick, grabbed a sharp kitchen knife, and joined the recovery party himself. Liu returned with Qingyin, whose recent anger about family inequality temporarily disappeared at the prospect of bringing home wild pork. The group climbed back toward the kill site carrying poles, knives, and enough manpower to move several hundred pounds. When they arrived, the boar was already being expertly butchered by a man Tiangyong had never met. Yuan Xiao recognized him at once as Wang Qingshan, the village's so-called hunter king. Qingshan had removed the head and trotters, peeled the hide, and opened the carcass with the skill of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Li confronted him for touching another hunter's kill without permission. Qingshan calmly pointed out that Tiangyong's blood-draining cut had been too shallow and the meat could have spoiled if left that way. Tiangyong checked the carcass and realized the older hunter was correct. Whatever rules Qingshan had broken by starting without permission, he had also saved a large amount of meat from souring. Tiangyong thanked him and offered a share, instead of turning the situation into a pointless dispute. He divided the kill by contribution, a double share for the shooter and gun, then shares for the other families helping recover it. Qingshan looked genuinely surprised that the newcomer valued principle over the chance to accuse him of stealing. Then he refused the meat entirely and asked for something far more dangerous. He wanted Tiangyong to join him on a bear hunt. Kli and accountant Liu objected immediately, but Qingshan ignored them and focused on the 3 bullet wounds grouped around the boar's vitals. He had assumed the kill came from a semi-automatic Type 56 because the rounds had landed so rapidly. When Tiangyong showed him the converted single-shot shotgun, Qingshan's respect sharpened into disbelief. A marksman who could reload that quickly was exactly the partner he wanted. Against a bear he had recently begun tracking, Tiangyong considered the advantages. Qingshan had dogs, experience, and local knowledge Tiangyong lacked. The multiplier made one successful bear kill potentially worth 100 bears, a reward too large to dismiss casually. The danger was human as much as animal. Tiangyong had known Qingshan for minutes and refused to trust his life to reputation alone. He asked for time to think, and Qingshan accepted without pressure, because he had not located the bear precisely yet. That restraint was a point in his favor, but not enough to override caution. Qingshan had hung some organs on branches as an offering to the mountain, a local hunting tradition, Yuan Xiao explained respectfully. With Qingshan declining his portion, Tiangyong kept half the meat as lead shooter and received the head and trotters by mountain custom. The tusks and bristle hair could be sold to state buyers, giving even the non-meat parts real value. On the walk down, Tiangyong noticed accountant Liu speaking quietly with Qingyin while they carried pork together. The teenager asked whether he would actually be allowed to eat some once they reached home. Liu answered that he could eat as much as he wanted, then surprised him further by promising new rubber shoes from part of their share. The argument over the bicycle and the eldest son's education had clearly forced Liu to reconsider how much the younger children were surrendering. One wild boar could not repair years of resentment, but it gave the father a practical opening to start treating Qingyin differently. By the time the group reached Shungan, word had spread and villagers poured toward them from every lane. The visible boar also changed Tiangyong's social position in ways money alone could not. Before the hunt, villagers knew him as Li Hongbing's unusual rescued youth. After the hunt, they had proof that he could contribute something the production team genuinely lacked. Old men began asking about mountain signs instead of his missing memories. Women who had barely spoken to him started sending invitations because one successful hunter could change a household's menu. Children followed Yuan Xiao around asking whether his master could really hit flying birds with stones. Yuan Xiao's answered every question with enough exaggeration to create new myths faster than Tiangyong could correct them. Tiangyong let most harmless stories survive because reputation could protect a newcomer as effectively as paperwork. He only stepped in when a story risked revealing impossible quantities or skills no villager had actually witnessed. The pork distribution also taught him something about Shungan's informal economy. Nobody needed a written contract to understand that the men who carried, cut, or guarded a kill deserved extra. Nobody argued when the shooter received the traditional trophies. Rules like those had survived because they prevented fights long before any commune office could intervene. Tiangyong respected them even when his hidden copies made the visible share almost meaningless to him. That respect mattered to Wang Qingshan. The older hunter had expected suspicion after touching another man's carcass. Instead, Tiangyong judged the result. Qingshan had saved the meat and deserved recognition for it. Their future relationship started from that decision rather than from the bear proposal. King Shen also showed why his hunter-king reputation had once existed. His cuts were clean, his knowledge of organs was precise, and he could read the boar's wounds without needing anyone to explain the shooting angle. The man was not a fraud. Something had happened to stop him from performing at his old level, and Li Hongbing's later story explained exactly what. Accountant Lu's household saw a different consequence from the same animal. Qing Yin had been angry enough after the peach incident to challenge the entire family hierarchy. The pork share gave his father a way to respond without admitting in public that the boy's complaints were justified. Promising rubber shoes was small compared with years of favoritism, but the promise belonged specifically to Qing Yin. The teenager heard that difference. Tiangyong noticed how quietly he accepted it and decided not to turn the family moment into a joke at their expense. He had arrived from a future where education and consumer goods meant different things. In 1976, every shoe, ticket, and school commute represented trade-offs a household felt physically. That same scarcity made his generosity powerful and dangerous. Giving 1 jin of pork to each family created gratitude. Giving 10 would have created questions about whether he understood value or had some hidden source nobody else possessed. Tiangyong therefore learned to appear generous by local standards rather than by the impossible scale inside his space. He kept visible success slightly ahead of what people expected from a talented hunter. The secret inventory could grow much faster. At Li Hongbing's dinner table, Suhua asked what part of the boar he liked best and laughed when Tiangyong admitted he barely knew the traditional preparations. She treated the question as another reason to feed him, rather than another flaw in the strange newcomer. Yuanshao concentrated on ribs with the seriousness of a man performing skilled labor. Li watched his son eat and repeatedly warned him to slow down. The warnings never changed the speed. Those ordinary dinners mattered. Because Tiangyong had no family record in this era, he could not recover parents, friends, or teammates from the future by searching harder. The people around Li's table were becoming the first stable relationships available to him. That was part of why Wang Qingshan's bare proposal bothered him. A reckless choice no longer risked only his own life. Li had spent political capital registering him. Suhua kept a place for him at meals. Yuanxiao followed him into the mountains. The more Tiangyong accepted those relationships, the less appealing it became to gamble everything for a spectacular kill. His multiplier encouraged ambition, but his new social ties encouraged discipline. That conflict would shape his hunting choices repeatedly. Lin Yuing remained outside the warm center of village life. Even when pork was distributed to every household, she stood beyond the easiest circle of conversation. Her family would receive meat through normal distribution, so she had no practical reason to approach Tiangyong. Still, the fact that she watched from a distance suggested the river rescue had not become a forgettable incident to her. Tiangyong's wave startled her partly because nobody usually invited the so-called jinx into the center of anything. Her retreat made more sense once he understood that attention itself could become dangerous in her household. Village gossip moved fast enough to shape reputations overnight. A young unmarried woman accepting meat directly from a young unmarried man could become a story before sunset. Yuan Xiao understood none of that when he kept pushing the two adults toward each other. The boy saw kindness and compatibility and assumed the rest should be simple. Tiangyong saw household politics, reputation, illness, poverty, and his own complete lack of romantic experience. Yuing saw even more risk because she would bear most of the social consequences if rumors started. That made every later breakfast at the youth quarters more significant than Yuan Xiao realized. It was not just cooking. Yuing was entering a place where someone fed her without calling her cursed or calculating what marriage payment she could produce. Tiangyong did not name that emotional change aloud because the source of it was already visible in her behavior. She stayed a little longer, or she spoke a little more. She stopped flinching every time someone directly thanked her. The improvement remained fragile, especially while her parents kept searching for ways to turn her marriage into family resources. Tiangyong's confrontation with the Chen father and son would eventually break one arrangement. It could not fix the household that created the arrangement in the first place. That distinction kept him from treating one threatening encounter as a complete rescue. Most people saw King Shan first and assumed the Hunter King had finally returned with another famous boar. Praise landed on the wrong man until Qin Ban, one of the village hunting brothers, pointed to Tiangyong carrying the traditional gunner's trophies. The crowd shifted attention at once and realized the newcomer had killed the animal after barely a week in the village. Qin Ban had intended to embarrass Qing Shan and immediately regretted hearing people compare Tiangyong favorably with the Qin brothers as well. Tiangyong ignored the competition and made a more useful decision. He gave every household at least 1 jin of pork. Mountain custom encouraged sharing, But Tiangyong's reasoning went beyond tradition. He was a newcomer with strange origins, and broad village goodwill was more valuable than hoarding meat he could secretly multiply. The distribution cost nearly 100 jin from the visible carcass, while 10 full-copied boars remained hidden inside his expanded space. Families left praising the young hunter, and invitations to dinner came from almost every direction. At the edge of the crowd, Tiangyong spotted Lin Yuing standing apart from everyone else. He waved for her to come take pork, but she blushed, turned, and hurried away before he could say anything. Tiangyong looked down at his blood-covered hands and decided the invitation may have appeared less friendly than intended. He carried his remaining share to Li Hongbing's house, where Suhua prepared another meal far richer than the village usually saw. While Tiangyong ate, Lin Yuing's family was discussing a far uglier use for their daughter. Her father wanted to marry her to a divorced man in his 40s who already had an adult son. The bride price would then be used to finance Yuing's brother's marriage. Even Yuing's mother hesitated at the cruelty and suggested Tianxiang because he seemed young, capable, and decent. Her husband dismissed the idea, certain a successful hunter would never accept the daughter their own family called cursed. Yuing overheard the conversation from outside and understood that her parents were measuring her value against her brother's wedding expenses. Tiangyong knew nothing about that discussion while enjoying braised boar skin and asking Suhua about cooking. Later that evening, he finally asked Li Hongbing the question left over from the mountain. Could Wang Qingshan be trusted as a partner on a bear hunt? Li answered carefully that Qingshan's character was good, but his condition around bears was dangerous. 5 years earlier, a bear had killed Qingshan's wife directly in front of him. Since then, his hands shook around serious prey, and he had failed to hunt anything large despite his old reputation. The desire for a bear hunt was not ordinary ambition. It was unresolved revenge. That made Qingshan a worse partner, not a better one, because trauma could destroy judgment at the exact moment a team needed discipline. Tiangyong thanked Li and privately considered the background check worth far more than the potential meat. The next morning, he sent Yuan Xiao to neighboring villages with a specific mission: find anyone selling trained hunting dogs. A reliable dog could track game through terrain that left almost no visible signs and reduce the risks Tiangyong had felt on the boar hunt. Yuan Xiao accepted the task with the pride of a junior officer and ran off before breakfast excitement could fade. Tiangyong, meanwhile, prepared another large sale by mentally processing 3 of his 10 stored boars. The expanded space let him skin, debone, and section the animals much faster than before without covering his room in blood. Then he carried only the proof Song Jinzi needed to see. At the black market, Tiangyong uncovered 3 wild boar heads in front of the merchant. Song physically recoiled before recovering enough composure to ask where anyone could obtain 3 boars so quickly. Tiangyong reminded him that black markets stayed healthy by not asking suppliers questions they had no need to answer. Song apologized and immediately invented his own explanation instead. Nearby Shanliang commune had been fighting a major wild boar problem, and several famous hunting groups had supposedly traveled there. Song assumed Tiangyong belonged to one of those gangs and had brought part of their haul to market. The mistake in theory was safer than anything Tiangyong could invent, so he encouraged Song to keep it private. That single request convinced the merchant his customer was connected to serious hunters with serious weapons. Tiangyong then asked whether Song could handle 3 entire processed boars. Song's merchant pride took over, and he promised to move all of it. Payment would need to include a quality gun if possible, matching ammunition, cash, ration tickets, and any trained hunting dog he could locate. Song admitted he could find only crude homemade firearms easily, but promised 100 rounds of 7.62mm ammunition. The dog request excited him because he now imagined Tiangyong's mysterious hunting gang had lost animals during the boar campaign. In Song's mind, supplying replacement dogs could turn one profitable customer into a permanent business relationship. Tiangyong let him keep constructing the fiction because every wrong assumption protected the real secret. They arranged a larger handoff 3 days later near Frozen Creek Lumber Camp, away from both village and market traffic. As a deposit, Song took the 3 boar heads and gave Tiangyong 92 yuan plus a thick assortment of tickets. That was more cash than many villagers handled across several months, and the full meat settlement had not even happened yet. Tiangyong added another bottle of premium liquor to his account for the next visit with Wang Yutian. He left the market with money, purchasing power, and an accidental reputation as a member of a dangerous regional hunting group. On the way home, Tiangyong noticed the local supply cooperative and decided his new cash should solve several basic problems at once. The red brick building carried political slogans outside and a completely different power structure inside. Sales clerks held secure state jobs, controlled access to desirable stock, and had little reason to treat customers like modern shopkeepers. Tiangyong watched the counters before choosing a slightly older clerk whose bright plastic hair clips suggested she cared about appearance. He listened long enough to hear other shoppers call her Sister Jiang, then joined her line with a plan. When his turn came, Tiangyong addressed her familiarly and complimented the unusual hair clip before asking for anything difficult. The clerk's guarded expression softened almost immediately when he noticed the accessory had supposedly come from Shanghai. Tiangyong then produced one of the best rabbit pelts he still had from earlier processing. He claimed it was the pelt she had asked him to prepare, letting the beautiful fur and the flattering story do the rest. Sister Zhang clearly did not remember making such a request because it had never happened. She accepted the fiction anyway because the pelt was soft, valuable, and exactly the sort of material she wanted for winter gloves. Within minutes, Tiangyong had gone from anonymous customer to little brother in the clerk's vocabulary. Only then did he place his large stack of tickets on the counter. Instead of resenting the work, Sister Zhang personally selected better stock, a clean flashlight, fresh soap, properly glued shoes, moisturizer, matches, and other necessities. People waiting behind Tiangyong stared at the quality difference because they knew the same shelves also held rusty, stale, or damaged goods. The social advantage was obvious. In a shortage economy, the relationship with the person behind the counter could matter as much as the ticket itself. The full order cost more than 70 yuan, cutting deeply into the money he had just earned. Still, Tiangyong left with household goods that would have taken an ordinary village family years to assemble. He hid most of the haul inside his mental space before reaching Shungan, keeping only a believable amount visible in the basket. That camouflage would let him retrieve supplies later, without anyone wondering where a young hunter had found so much merchandise. The long walk home also added another item to his growing list of goals. He needed a bicycle badly. The cooperative visit also taught Tiangyong how different official trade felt from Song Jinzi's market. Song cared about margin, speed, and whether a customer would return. Sister Jiang cared about tickets, stock access, workplace relationships, and whether helping someone would make her day harder. Both systems ran on trust, but they rewarded different behavior. Tiangyong needed the black market for flexibility, and the cooperative for ordinary goods that looked legitimate in a household. He kept visible purchases modest enough that Li Hongbing would not suddenly wonder how an amnesiac hunter became a wholesale buyer. The hidden space made concealment easy, yet concealment itself required discipline. One careless afternoon of producing canned peaches, fresh shoes, and ammunition from nowhere could destroy weeks of careful reputation building. Tiangyong therefore maintained ordinary-looking shortages on purpose. He still borrowed tools when borrowing made his life look ordinary. He still asked where things were sold. He still walked to places he could have stocked privately from hidden inventory. Those small inconveniences became part of the camouflage protecting his secret. Sister Jiang became useful for another reason, because she knew when desirable stock arrived. A clerk who liked him could quietly mention fresh batteries, stronger rope, better shoes, or newly delivered hunting supplies. Tiangyong never asked her to break rules. He only made sure she preferred helping him when several legal customers wanted the same limited item. The rabbit pelt had purchased that preference far more efficiently than arguing at a counter ever could. Back in Shungan, the goods changed daily life in small ways. A reliable flashlight made night travel safer. Good matches saved frustration every time the old stove needed lighting. Proper rubber shoes mattered when roads turned muddy. Toothpaste and soap restored tiny pieces of modern routine Tiangyong had stopped appreciating in his old life. The emotional effect surprised him. A few familiar habits made 1976 feel less like a nightmare he had to endure, and more like a life he could organize. The same adjustment showed in his hunting plans. At first, every successful kill felt like proof the multiplier would save. Now he had started thinking in supply chains, customers, storage limits, ammunition cost, and reputation risk. The cheat had not removed scarcity. It had changed which scarcities mattered. Food was becoming easy compared with every other problem around him. Trust, transport, legal cover, trained partners, and safe markets were now the bottlenecks. Transport became a real bottleneck because every larger trade demanded more walking, borrowing, or help from someone else's vehicle. The Shanliang bounty became attractive, partly because it solved transport with an official prize instead of an unexplained purchase. A Type 56 application would solve another bottleneck in the same way. Tiangyong preferred rewards that came with paperwork because paper made extraordinary assets look ordinary. That logic also strengthened the value of Wang Yutian's lumber camp connection. Selling 7 boars privately through one village market would make Song Jinzi curious and increase exposure. Selling through a state work unit gave the meat a buyer with real demand and an institutional reason to absorb volume. Wang could explain the transaction as game purchased for workers. Tiangyong could remain the unnamed hunter behind the delivery. The arrangement turned one cautious cook into a shield between impossible supply and official accounting. Wang's eldest son, Daming, understood that before his father fully did. During one visit, Tiangyong remained in the front room, while Daming helped his father prepare ingredients in the kitchen. The boy quietly pointed out that Tiangyong was talented, productive, and still new enough to need reliable local partners. If the family treated him fairly now, future hunts could become steady income rather than one lucky dinner. Daming also warned his father not to squeeze too hard on the middleman fee. Wang bristled at being lectured by his own son. Then he followed the advice. That was why the eventual 5% arrangement worked so smoothly. Tiangyong had expected to negotiate with a cautious adult and discovered a quiet teenager helping shape the other side of the table. The partnership benefited both families without requiring either side to pretend it was charity. Wang gained commission money that could feed and educate 3 sons. Frozen Creek gained game meat above normal ration supply. Tiangyong gained volume sales and distance from the paperwork. Daming gained proof that careful thinking could improve his household's future. The arrangement also changed Wang's hospitality. He still complained about ingredients and watched every bottle, but he stopped acting as if each visit threatened his pantry. A profitable hunter at the table meant tomorrow's food could be better than today's. The 3 boys noticed that change before any adult mentioned it. Their excitement around Tiangyong remained connected to meat, yet familiarity gradually replaced the original calculation. Dadan still asked what was inside every basket. Dasha still appeared ready to challenge anyone before understanding the situation. Daming still observed from the edge and spoke only when the point mattered. Tiangyong began recognizing each child's role without needing Yuan Xiao to explain it. That household became another anchor outside Shungan itself. Frozen Creek also showed Tiangyong how uneven development already was. Workers there had more bicycles, steadier wages, and easier access to goods than farming families only miles away. Contrast reminded him that location could matter as much as effort in this period. His future knowledge told him the country would change rapidly, but the people around him still lived inside current restrictions. That knowledge created opportunity without making him invincible. He could remember broad reform trends and still fail tomorrow. If a boar hit him, a gun exploded, or officials disliked unexplained wealth. The safest strategy remained gradual visible success, backed by much larger hidden reserves. Every legal milestone helped. Household registration, hunter license, land permit, official meat sales. Every social milestone helped too. Li's trust, Wang's partnership, Sister Zhang's goodwill, Song's business respect. By the time Tiangyong started discussing a brick house, he was no longer betting on one magical ability. He had built a network around it. A few days later, Tiangyong headed back to Frozen Creek with Yuan Xiao, 2 sets of boar trotters, and another bottle of premium liquor. Their earlier search for trained hunting dogs had failed, leaving plenty of yard animals, and nothing Tiangyong trusted in the mountains. Wang Yuqian's 3 sons were eating cabbage noodles and carefully leaving one precious slice of fatty pork untouched for their father. The quiet sacrifice caught Tiangyong harder than any complaint could have, because all 3 boys were clearly hungry. Yuan Xiao's arrival shattered the silence, and Wang's practiced nose identified meat and liquor before anyone uncovered the basket. When Tiangyong revealed 8 boar trotters, the cook immediately understood the mountain custom behind them. Only the lead gunner kept the trotters, which meant Tiangyong had taken primary credit on more than one portion of the kill. Tiangyong clarified that the sets came from his own share of the same boar, but the 3-shot story still stunned Wang. Yuan Xiao retold the chase while making his own sprint sound much more heroic than the near disaster it had actually been. Wang cared less about the comedy than about Tiangyong, firing 3 accurate rounds from a single-shot conversion. The old shotgun had never performed anything close to that in Wang's hands. He ordered his sons to stop eating, because the trotters would become the real dinner that night. Tiangyong's business goal remained the same as the previous visit: get the sober version of Wang to finish explaining the lumber camp meat purchases. The smell of braised trotters eventually filled the courtyard strongly enough to make a neighboring child cry for meat. Wang prepared one dish with sauerkraut and another in a darker soy braise, both using technique Tiangyong could never reproduce. The meal slowed everyone enough for the adults to finally speak seriously. Wang Yutian's household made the economics of the lumber camp deal impossible to ignore. 3 growing sons could erase a pot of meat before Tiangyong finished tasting the sauce. That appetite was funny at the table and expensive every other day of the month. A commission stream gave Wang something more reliable than hoping Tiangyong arrived with another gift basket. The cook could earn because of his workplace connection, not because Tiangyong felt sorry for him. Tiangyong preferred that structure because both sides earned something concrete. People protected income they had earned far more confidently than charity they feared might stop. Wang also understood the camp kitchen from the inside. He knew which managers could authorize purchases, what cuts workers preferred, and how much irregular supply the kitchen could absorb. Those details turned a vague statement about buying meat into an actual sales route. The 10% premium on large game mattered less than the volume. One boar sold slightly above market was useful. 7 boars moved without ration tickets or public village bargaining changed Tiangyong's entire cash position. His 5% offer gave Wang a reason to help scale that volume rather than resent it. Daming recognized the same logic when he quietly backed the percentage. The teenager did not talk much, but when money entered the conversation, he listened like someone several years older. Tiang stopped mistaking silence for timidity after that. Wang's sons also exposed a softer reason the partnership worked. During one visit, their father brought home only 3 slices of fatty pork from the camp. Each boy left his slice untouched for him. No adult had ordered them to do it. The children simply understood their father gave them nearly everything first. Tiangyong remembered that image when deciding whether 5% was too generous. Extra commission would return to a household where the money clearly mattered. It also reduced the chance Wang would ever risk the relationship for a short-term advantage. Trust became cheaper when both sides were doing well. The lumber camp's relative prosperity showed up in transport, too. Several families could borrow or own bicycles, while Shungan treated Accountant Lu's single bicycle as a community treasure. Each ride reminded Tiangyong why the Shanliang reward appealed to him so strongly. A bicycle would save hours every week across the market, camp, grain station, and mountain roads. It would also be completely explainable if won through an official bounty. That clean explanation was worth almost as much as the machine itself. Tiangyong had enough hidden value to buy many things eventually. The challenge was owning them, without making people ask where the money came from. Official prizes, hunting income, and documented meat sales converted magical production into believable progress. The house followed the same pattern. A brick home funded by visible hunting success made sense. A brick home appearing around an unemployed amnesiac would not. Tiangyong's real project was therefore larger than construction. He was building a public story strong enough to carry the private truth hidden underneath it. Wang explained that Frozen Creek bought privately sourced wild game and paid roughly 10% above normal prices for better cuts like boar and deer. Small game received ordinary market rates, but large animals were attractive because the camp needed reliable protein for workers. Tiangyong asked what Wang expected as the middleman. Wang awkwardly proposed 10 yuan per transaction, revealing that he was still thinking in the scale of ordinary hunters. Tiangyong offered 5% of total revenue instead. The percentage sounded generous because it was generous, but Tiangyong knew his multiplier would eventually create transactions far larger than Wang imagined. 5% gave Wang a reason to protect the relationship, solve paperwork, and handle public contact without Tiangyong appearing as a private meat magnate. Tiangyong added one firm condition. Wang's name would face the lumber camp, while Tiangyong stayed out of the official spotlight. Reform had not begun, and sudden unexplained wealth was the last thing a man with impossible inventory wanted attached to his household record. Wang looked to his eldest son, Daming, who quietly recognized the long-term value and nodded. The 2 adults clinked enamel cups and turned a drunken half-sentence into a real business partnership. The next morning, Wang served buns stuffed with sauerkraut and crisp pork cracklings. After 2 days of the cook's food, Tiangyong accepted that his own kitchen skills were a permanent weakness no cheat had fixed. He and Yuan Xiao returned to Shungan, where Tiangyong carried the shotgun toward the mountain edge for a light hunt. Before reaching the forest, he overheard village women gossiping that Lin Yuing was being married off. The prospective husband matched the arrangement Yuing had overheard, a much older divorced man with an adult son. Her parents intended to use the bride price for their son's wedding, reducing their daughter to a financial transfer. Tiangyong hated the idea, but had no legal or family standing to march into another household and cancel an arranged marriage. Back at the youth quarters, Yuan Xiao made the same problem personal. He bluntly asked whether his master wanted a wife, and immediately received a light knock on the head for trying to become a matchmaker. Yuan Xiao argued that Yuing was kind, hardworking, and beautiful, while the jinx story was just village superstition. Tiangyong refused because his own life still lacked a permanent gun, a finished house, and any stable long-term foundation. Marriage felt several problems too far ahead, even if the thought of Ewing being traded to the older man still bothered him. Yuanshao looked disappointed, but accepted the answer and followed Tiangyong to the reed marsh for slingshot practice. Tiangyong had promised to teach a rapid three-shot technique he called triple meteor. The method used recoil rhythm, hand position, and prepared ammunition to put 3 stones into motion with almost no wasted movement. Tiangyong demonstrated at full speed and produced 3 strikes so quickly Yuanshao could barely separate them visually. When the boy asked for a slower demonstration, Tiangyong discovered decades of muscle memory did not have an easy slow setting. The second attempt was nearly as fast, and one stray shot accidentally killed a pheasant hiding in the reeds. Rather than waste the result, Tiangyong turned the bird into a practical lesson. 5 more pheasants appeared running through the grass, giving master and disciple moving targets at different angles. Tiangyong dropped 3 with the opening sequence and told Yuanshao to follow. The teenager's first shot was respectable, but his reload broke down and the remaining birds escaped his range. Tiangyong chased, fired while moving, and brought down the last 2 before they disappeared. 6 pheasants meant 600 copies inside the hidden space, a huge gain from what had started as practice. Yuanshao celebrated, slipped into a reed patch, and then shouted that he had found nests full of eggs. The patch contained more than 100 speckled pheasant eggs. Tiangyong touched one personally and watched 100 copies appear. He repeated the test on another egg with the same result. Then Yuanshao handed him an egg the boy had already touched, and nothing happened. That difference revealed a new system condition, more important than the size of the nest. The multiplier recognized first collection. If another person claimed or handled an item first, Tiangyong could not multiply it afterward. For hunting, the killing blow already matched that pattern. For gathering, first contact mattered in the same way. Tiangyong sent Yuanshao to collect the dead birds while he moved quickly through the untouched nests. By the time he finished, roughly 130 eligible eggs had become around 13,000 inside the hidden space. Together with 600 pheasants, the marsh suddenly held more value than many harvests. The celebration ended when Tiangyong found Yuanshao crouched behind reeds, trembling instead of collecting birds. 2 armed men stood nearby, holding several of their pheasants and laughing about Lin Ewing. Yuanshao quietly identified them as the older widower and his adult son, the same pair tied to the unwanted marriage. Their comments about Ewing were ugly enough that the teenager could barely repeat them. Tiangyong told Yuanshao to stay hidden, put down the basket, and walked into view carrying Wang Yutian's shotgun. The father, Chen Sanggu, wore a homemade rifle, while the younger man carried a hunting knife and far more confidence than good judgment. The son challenged Tiangyong over the pheasants and claimed nothing proved the birds belonged to anyone else. Tiangyong fired close enough to the man's face that the blast stripped away every ounce of swagger without striking him. The younger Chen lost control of his bladder, while his father dropped the homemade rifle and raised both hands. Tiangyong demanded to know why they were speaking about a young woman from Shungan, as if marriage gave them ownership already. The son immediately blamed his father for the entire arrangement, proving their family loyalty lasted only until a gun entered the conversation. Tiangyong ordered both men to cancel the marriage and stay away from Shungan. They promised instantly, but promises made under fear did not satisfy him. He kicked the fallen knife toward them and demanded they leave something behind as insurance against returning. The threat pushed father and son into a panicked argument over who should make the sacrifice. While they fought, Tiangyong noticed their bodies drifting conveniently toward the dropped rifle. The moment Chen Sanggu reached for the weapon, Tiangyong fired twice. Both rounds punched through cloth close enough to demonstrate exactly how much precision he had deliberately withheld. The Chens froze, understood what a slightly different aim would have cost them, and surrendered completely. They fled without the rifle or knife and promised never to approach Shungan again. Tiangyong claimed both weapons, not because he trusted crude gear, but because disarming the pair made their promise much more believable. Yuanshao emerged with a look of absolute worship and immediately began imagining how quickly Ewing would hear the marriage was cancelled. Tiangyong warned him not to turn a dangerous confrontation into village theater. The next major transaction happened after dark, when Song Jinzi met Tiangyong outside the market using an unnecessarily dramatic password. Song believed he was dealing with a representative of a secret hunting gang, so Tiangyong allowed the theatrics to protect that illusion. In a forest clearing, Tiangyong had laid out 3 processed boars in separate piles. The shipment included roughly 500 jin of meat, more than 100 jin of bones, hides, tusks, and bristle hair. He deliberately reduced the visible yield and blamed hunting dog feed, so the cloned animals would not produce suspiciously perfect totals. Song weighed the goods, confirmed the numbers, and then announced he had finally found a hunting dog. The exciting word was followed by the disappointing detail that the animal was still a nursing puppy. Tiangyong nearly rejected the idea until Song described the bloodline. The puppy came from a Liuzhou red crossed with a black wolf dog, two powerful working lines known for courage, loyalty, and hunting ability. A trained adult would have been preferable, but that genetic combination was too promising to ignore. Song wanted 50 jin of pork for the puppy, and Tiangyong agreed without bargaining. The bicycle request went nowhere, because bicycle tickets were almost impossible for a regional black market dealer to obtain. The meat settlement, however, was excellent. 300 yuan in cash, plus around 200 yuan worth of assorted tickets. Song's helpers moved the pork to a hidden cart in multiple trips while keeping the ammunition separate until the loading was complete. The caution amused Tiangyong because Song was clearly afraid his imaginary gang might take both bullets and meat. Once the last basket disappeared, Song handed over 100 rounds of 7.62 mm ammunition. Tiangyong returned home with money, tickets, ammunition, 2 captured weapons, and a future hunting puppy waiting for pickup. His real life was still only weeks old in this era, yet different people had already formed, completely different legends around him. The village saw a generous prodigy. Song saw a dangerous gang hunter. Wanxiao saw a master. Wang Qingshan saw his impossible marksman. Lin Yuing remained, the one person Tiangyong could not read, mostly because she blushed and fled before giving him enough evidence. The captured Chen rifle was useful mostly as evidence of how badly the confrontation had frightened them. Tiangyong inspected the homemade weapon and found none of the confidence he felt with Wang Yutian's converted shotgun. Crude barrels and inconsistent ammunition could turn a hunter's own gun into the most dangerous object in the forest. He stored the rifle rather than trusting it with his life. The knife was simpler and became a spare tool Yuan Xiao could use under supervision. Tiangyong also made the boy promise not to repeat the exact threats used against the Chens. If village gossip turned the encounter into a story about attempted mutilation and gunfire, local officials might ask questions nobody needed. The useful outcome was enough. The marriage arrangement was cancelled, and both men were too frightened to come back. Yuan Xiao agreed, then immediately asked whether telling Yuing only the good part still counted as gossip. Tiangyong knew from the boy's expression that the message would reach her with or without permission. He settled for demanding that Yuan Xiao not embarrass her publicly. The teenager took that instruction more seriously because he had finally learned how easily good intentions could create rumors. Yuing's first mornings at the youth quarters reflected the change. She arrived before the village was fully active, did quiet work, and left before crowds could form. The schedule reduced gossip and gave her a place to contribute without being watched by hostile relatives. Tiangyong never formally hired her. Payment would have turned the arrangement into another transaction around a girl whose family already treated everything she did that way. Instead, he made food available and expected her to eat when she cooked. Yuing resisted that part much harder than the work. Years of being called unlucky had trained her to believe consuming someone else's food created a debt. Tiangyong handled the problem by treating meals as normal rather than generous. If she cooked, she ate. If there were eggs, she received eggs. If there was meat, plain porridge was not accepted as an alternative. The rule worked better than sympathy because it gave Yuing no reason to feel publicly pitied. Her health improved slowly enough that Tiangyong did not mistake better nutrition for a cure. The unknown illness still existed. What changed first was the exhaustion caused by being underfed. Her hands became steadier, and her face stopped looking permanently drained. Yuan Xiao noticed too, and became even more convinced his matchmaking instincts were brilliant. Tiangyong responded by increasing the boy's training whenever that confidence turned into interference. Horse stance became the easiest correction because it improved Yuan Xiao's legs while giving his mouth time to reconsider decisions. The boy complained dramatically and still returned every morning. He wanted the shooting skill too badly to let punishment drive him away. Tiangyong began teaching him basic principles before advanced speed, stance, breathing, release consistency, target, tracking, and safe angles. The triple meteor demonstration had impressed Yuan Xiao, but Tiangyong knew speed without control would only create missed shots and accidents. He refused to let the teenager chase flashy technique before the foundation was reliable. That teaching style came directly from competitive training in his old life. Thousands of repetitions had built the rapid reload that saved Yuan Xiao from the bore. The boy saw magic where Tiangyong saw years of repetition. Tiangyong saw boring practice performed until it became instinct. He could teach that part honestly, even while hiding the multiplier. Ewing sometimes watched from the kitchen doorway and laughed when Yuan Xiao's confidence exceeded his results. Those small moments gave the youth quarters a household rhythm Tiangyong had not planned. Morning exercise came first before food, errands, or hunting plans. Yuan Xiao appeared with energy and complaints. Ewing swept, cooked, and slowly learned she was allowed to sit at the same table. Tiangyong handled hunting plans between bites. No one called the arrangement family, but it began functioning like one in daily practice. That made the master's wife slip more dangerous emotionally than the words themselves. Yuan Xiao had named a possibility both adults were carefully refusing to discuss. Tiangyong's escape with the bare gallbladder was therefore less cowardice than lack of experience. He had spent years training for pressure, where targets, timing, and results could be measured. Romantic uncertainty had none of those clean variables. Ewing, meanwhile, interpreted his refusal to mock the comment as something more encouraging than Tiangyong intended. She became slightly bolder about returning the next morning. Neither adult said anything direct. The relationship moved through meals, keys, errands, and whether Ewing believed she could enter the kitchen without asking permission. The house key mattered most. Giving it to her meant Tiangyong trusted her around his possessions when he was gone. Ewing treated that trust almost ceremonially, locking the door carefully and never touching anything outside the kitchen without reason. Tiangyong noticed and gave her more freedom rather than less. For someone whose own home treated her as a source of bad luck, being trusted with another person's home changed the way she carried herself. That was the relationship shift the village could not see from outside. The morning after the Chen confrontation, Tiangyong woke to sweeping outside his quarters and assumed Yuan Xiao had arrived early. He opened the door shirtless from exercise and found Lin Ewing holding the broom instead. Ewing froze, stared at his bare torso, and turned red so quickly Tiangyong shut the door again out of shared embarrassment. He dressed while privately blaming Yuan Xiao for arranging the visit without warning either adult. When he came back out, Ewing had moved to another corner of the yard and was pretending the morning had begun normally. Yuan Xiao arrived soon afterward, wearing the innocent smile of someone absolutely responsible. Tiangyong ordered him into horse stance and told him to hold the position, turning training into quiet punishment. Then he asked Ewing why she had come. Her answer stayed simple. She wanted to help with cooking and cleaning because Tiangyong had repeatedly helped her. In the kitchen, Ewing lifted a dangerously hot bowl of steamed eggs with bare hands and served breakfast without a flinch. Tiangyong grabbed her wrist briefly to stop her from leaving before eating, then released it the moment he realized the contact embarrassed her. He insisted she sit and share the meal because she was thin enough for her health to worry him. Ewing tried to choose only plain porridge, but Tiangyong pushed buns and steamed eggs toward her as well. Her cooking was far better than his, turning simple pheasant eggs and soy sauce into the best breakfast the youth quarters had produced. Outside, Yuan Xiao's legs began shaking from the extended stance. Ewing noticed and asked whether he was all right. Tiangyong said the boy was building character and let him suffer a little longer before calling him in to eat. The promise of a hunting trip erased Yuan Xiao's complaints almost immediately. On the walk out, Tiangyong explained why sending Ewing to a single man's house alone could create rumors even when everyone's intentions were clean. Yuan Xiao finally understood the danger and lost the smug expression that had accompanied his matchmaking. Then the boy shared more useful news about Shanliang Commune's wild boar emergency. The bounty had risen to 50 jin of grain and 20 bullets for each boar killed. Shanliang's reward structure was designed to attract exactly the kind of organized hunters Li Hongbing had warned about. Grain rewarded every verified kill immediately. Ammunition replaced part of what hunters spent doing the job. The bicycle at 10 boars rewarded sustained results rather than one lucky encounter. The television ticket at 15 pushed the best teams to remain after ordinary hunters might have gone home. Tiangyong could see why famous groups had gathered there. The commune was converting scarce consumer goods into emergency pest control. For Tiangyong, the same system offered legal proof of success that private sales could never provide. The cloned boars could not earn that proof because they had never existed publicly in the mountains. Even if he staged the carcasses, identical size, markings, wounds, and age would eventually expose the pattern. Experienced hunters spent their lives reading exactly those differences. Trying to fool them with 7 perfect copies would be reckless. The final blow rule inside Tiangyong's multiplier created the opposite strategy. He needed real teams to find and pressure real boars. Then he needed enough control over the firing position to land the decisive shot himself. That made teamwork valuable without letting teammates accidentally erase the hidden reward. It also made a semi-automatic Type 56, much more than a status weapon. A faster follow-up shot could protect partners when several bores charged together. The borrowed conversion had already proved Tiangyong could overcome slow reloading, but skill did not remove the mechanical limitation. Winning access to a better rifle through official performance would solve that weakness cleanly. The bounty, therefore, connected transport, ammunition, reputation, and firearm access in one campaign. Tiangyong was not chasing Shan Liang simply because more meat sounded exciting. He was looking at the shortest legitimate path, from talented newcomer to properly equipped hunter. Even one official Shan Liang's success could strengthen Tiangyong's standing with forestry officials, who controlled future firearm assignments. A documented record would also make later ammunition purchases look less unusual for a young hunter living far from the county. That bureaucratic value mattered because every hidden advantage became safer when ordinary paperwork could explain the visible result. Tiangyong therefore treated the bounty as infrastructure for his new life, not simply another place to collect animals. Before taking that risk, Red King needed to prove the team could find game faster than Tiangyong's old methods ever had. 10 boars earned a bicycle, while 15 added a television ticket. Those rewards transformed the distant crisis into exactly the opportunity Tiangyong had been searching for. A bicycle alone was one of the most desirable household possessions in the region, and ammunition mattered even more to a hunter. Tiangyong considered presenting his copied boars and rejected the thought immediately. The clones looked identical, and experienced hunting teams inspecting whole carcasses would notice impossible repetition. The only safe method was to hunt there legitimately and make sure he personally landed each killing blow. Every verified boar would earn official bounty while secretly adding 100 more animals to his hidden inventory. The commune reportedly allowed exceptional hunters to apply for a Type 56 semi-automatic rifle as well. That weapon could replace the borrowed single-shot shotgun and drastically change how much danger Tiangyong could handle. Their actual hunt that day produced only one pheasant, reinforcing how thoroughly the land around Shungen had been picked over. Without a trained dog, Tiangyong refused to push deep into unfamiliar mountains for larger game. His caution saved lives on the first boar hunt, and he had no reason to become reckless simply because the multiplier promised profit. On the way home, Wang Qingshan intercepted him and invited him over for another bear discussion. At Qingshan's house, Tiangyong first noticed an aging wolf blue hunting dog named Stone. Even past its prime, the animal was exactly the kind of tracking partner Tiangyong wished he already owned. Qingshan announced that he had located the bear and proposed a 3-man hunt. Tiangyong would serve as lead gunner, another man would carry an axe as backup, and Qingshan would flush the bear toward them with Stone. Qingshan offered Tiangyong the meat and asked for no share at all. The generosity confirmed what Li had said. This hunt was about revenge, not profit. Tiangyong asked one direct question. Could Qingshan honestly keep his hands steady when he saw the bear? Qingshan fell silent, and the tremor in his hands answered for him. Tiangyong refused the hunt before the offer could tempt him further. Free bear meat meant nothing if the plan depended on a traumatized leader losing control at the worst possible second. Qingshan laughed bitterly, but did not argue, which told Tiangyong the older man understood the truth, even if he hated it. He declined dinner and returned to the youth quarters. Smoke was rising from the kitchen because Yuing and Yuan Xiao had already begun preparing the lone pheasant. Yuing looked up and welcomed him home with such ordinary warmth that Tiangyong felt a reaction he did not know what to do with. Dinner became braised pheasant with mushrooms, excuse, and wild greens seasoned with supplies from Sister Jiang. Tiangyong praised the cooking sincerely, and the tension in Yuing's hands visibly relaxed. She seemed to measure her own worth through usefulness, a habit that made sense after years of being treated as a burden. When Yuing left that evening, she walked more lightly than Tiangyong had seen before. At her house, however, the consequences of the Chen confrontation had already arrived. A matchmaker demanded the bride price money back because the older widower had abruptly canceled the marriage. Yuing's parents returned the cash with fury and humiliation instead of relief. Rather than question the men who had spoken crudely about their daughter, they blamed Yuing's supposed curse for ruining another arrangement. Yuing came home, smiling from Tiangyong's dinner, without knowing the anger waiting behind her family's door. The next morning brought better news for Tiangyong. Li Hongbing handed him the application for a residential plot and explained the village approval process. A legal house would give Tiangyong a permanent base instead of abandoned youth quarters and make his future in Shungan visible to everyone. Before dealing with the signatures, Tiangyong and Yuanxiao explored the last nearby area they had not hunted carefully. a red pine forest. Yuan Xiao found fresh rub marks almost immediately. Tiangyong examined the fur and scent and identified a black bear rather than a larger brown bear. A black bear was still deadly, but more manageable than the larger species King Shan's obsession had made Tiangyong imagine. They followed the sign for around 20 minutes and reached an area of smashed vegetation, blood, and overlapping tracks. Another hunting team had already found the animal. Tiangyong's first thought was Wang Qingshan. The older hunter had located a bear, been refused, and possessed exactly the obsession required to go anyway. A heavy explosion echoed through the trees. Before Tiangyong could finish the thought, he and Yuan Xiao ran toward the sound and found the hunt collapsing into disaster. Stone, Qingshan's wolf blue dog, lay with a broken spine, hind legs motionless after taking the bear's force. The rescue after the bear fight exposed how thin Shungan's emergency resources really were. Men arrived with door panels, ropes, old quilts, and whatever could substitute for medical transport. Nobody wasted time complaining about the equipment because the injured hunters needed movement before darkness. Li Hongbing assigned strong carriers in rotating groups, so one exhausted man would not drop a patient on the mountain path. Accountant Liu recorded names and responsibilities even during the chaos, turning village habit into a rough emergency system. Tiangyong stayed near Li Jiankong because the exploded shotgun had created injury villagers could not safely treat. He repeatedly warned helpers not to pull visible metal fragments from the man's face. Removing the wrong piece could turn contained bleeding into something fatal before a doctor ever saw him. Zhao Weidong remained conscious enough to answer questions about pain and movement, which made his condition easier to monitor. King Shan tried to stand on his own and nearly collapsed immediately. The older hunter hated being carried, but blood loss ended the argument faster than any persuasion. Stone made no sound when villagers lifted him. The dog's front paws still searched for purchase, while the dead weight of his rear body dragged beneath him. That image stayed with Tiangyong longer than the bear carcass. A hunting dog obeyed a human plan it could not understand and paid for King Shan's revenge with permanent paralysis. That was one reason Tiangyong later took Red King's training and safety so seriously. A powerful dog was still a partner, not disposable equipment. At the commune level, even emergency treatment required letters and official introductions because hospitals operated through work units and collective records. Li used his position to move those documents as quickly as possible. Tiangyong saw again why a competent team leader could matter more than money in rural life. Li could not perform surgery or produce medicine. He could make the system respond before delays killed someone. That administrative competence was the same force moving Tiangyong's land permit, while the hunter himself remained on the mountain. The lazy villagers who changed their land votes after hearing about bear meat were not transformed into better people. They simply revealed what motivated them. Lai understood the difference and used it without wasting energy on a moral lecture. Once the vote passed, he never reopened the argument. Tiangyong's place in Shungan had become official in another dimension, not just household registration, but land he could build on. That permanence mattered after watching King Shan's household collapse around one obsession. Tiangyong wanted a home that anchored his future rather than a life organized only around the next hunt. The bear carcass, meanwhile, carried many different forms of value. Villagers focused on meat because that was the value they needed immediately. Experienced hunters noticed paws, nose, bones, hide, and medicinal organs. Tiangyong noticed all of them plus the 99 copies nobody else knew existed. That difference forced him to think like a trader as much as a hunter. Some products could be sold locally. Others, like repeated bear gallbladders, required distant buyers and careful timing. Selling too many of a rare item in one district would either crush the price or create rumors about illegal hunting on an impossible scale. Tiangyong therefore planned to release them slowly through different routes. Songjinzi could handle some private sales. State stores might take others. Future travel could open additional markets. The hidden space made him rich in inventory, long before it made him safely rich in cash. Processing created another bottleneck. Once the hidden inventory reached impossible scale, 100 bears meant 100 separate gallbladders, hides, skeletons, and mountains of meat. The upgraded mental control let Tiangyong work without physical tools, but his brain still imposed a daily limit. 10 bears in a day left him exhausted enough to stop. He respected the warning rather than pushing until he collapsed. 10 days of invisible work sounded slow only compared with magic. For a normal butcher, processing that much game would require a team, space, water, tools, and an explanation for where every carcass came from. Tiangyong needed a locked room and enough discipline to rest when the headache began. The hidden labor also protected the clone problem, because nobody saw 100 identical bears side by side. Once separated into cuts, hides, fat, bone, and organs, duplication became far harder to recognize. The same strategy that had protected his rabbit sales scaled upward. Process first and distribute later became Tiangyong's safest operating rule. Lu Bingrun's teaching about gallbladders added another lesson. Traditional knowledge still contained value. Tiangyong's future education did not automatically replace. He knew modern economics and shooting. The older villager knew how medicinal hunters preserved an organ for maximum price in this exact climate and market. Tiangyong listened, rather than acting superior. The beeswax, linden bark, yellow clay, pine containers, and deer blood each existed for a practical reason developed through experience. Even if some parts sounded old-fashioned, buyers judged the finished product by those standards. Ignoring them would leave money on the table. Tiangyong's cigarette gift to Lu Bingrun therefore purchased more than friendliness. It respected specialized knowledge that Tiangyong did not possess himself. That habit would matter if he intended to build a long-term hunting operation, instead of remaining a lone shooter with a secret. King Shan's return from the hospital brought the emotional cost of the bear hunt back into view. Li Jiankong faced a permanently damaged appearance and uncertain recovery. Zhao Weidong had leg injuries that could keep him from work. Stone would never hunt again. Qingshan carried responsibility for each consequence because he had pushed the team toward the bear after Tiangyong refused. His request to join the Shanliang hunt was therefore partly an attempt to create income for people his obsession had harmed. Tiangyong did not erase that responsibility by agreeing. He simply recognized that the man asking now was making a different decision for a different reason. The partnership also had clear limits. Tiangyong would control the shooting plan. King Shan's physical courage could be used where it helped without letting revenge dictate the route. Red King, once ready, would take over much of the tracking role Stone could no longer perform. Yuan Xiao would remain support rather than being thrown into the front line, because one boar chase had already demonstrated the cost of overconfidence. For the first time, Tiangyong was beginning to think in terms of a real hunting team. Each member needed a role. Each role needed a reason. And the multiplier worked best when everyone else helped create a clean final shot without taking the kill themselves. That requirement could have made Tiangyong selfish. Instead, the bear disaster reminded him that securing the final blow was worthless. If partners died to create, future hunts would need to balance system profit and human safety. That lesson was more valuable than the bear meat. One teammate, Zhao Weidong, had deep slashes across his legs and could no longer stand. The gunner, Li Jiankong, had tried to save him with a crude homemade shotgun. The weapon exploded in Li Jiankong's hands, throwing metal into his face just before the bear reached him. Half his face had been torn apart, and he lay motionless enough for Tiangyong to fear he was already dead. Only Wang Qingshan remained upright. A long claw wound across his chest poured blood while he faced the bear with an axe and visibly shaking hands. The bear itself had used a wounded retreat as bait, drawing the team into pursuit before turning and ambushing them. That intelligence made the scene even worse, because every mistake Qingshan's obsession created had been punished immediately. The wind carried his scent straight toward the animal, removing any chance of simply disappearing into the trees. Qingshan accepted that he had nowhere safe to run and prepared for a final charge. Man and bear moved at nearly the same time. Qingshan rolled aside at the last instant and buried his axe into the bear's hind leg. The strike injured the animal, but left the hunter off balance and on the ground. A bear did not need long against a fallen man. Tiangyong raised the converted shotgun and began the reload rhythm. His hands knew better than thought. 3 shots cracked through the forest in rapid succession. Qingshan froze, because every other gunner in the team was already down. The axe wound had made the bear stumble and twist, opening its chest toward Tiangyong for a fraction of a second. All 3 rounds entered the vital area around the heart. The black bear released one final roar, lost its legs and crashed to the forest floor. Tiangyong did not celebrate. Too many people were bleeding for the kill to feel clean. He sent Yuan Xiao sprinting downhill for help and began checking the wounded in order of immediate danger. Li Jiankong was still breathing, barely, despite the facial damage and embedded metal. Moving him carelessly could worsen the injuries, so Tiangyong left him stabilized where he lay until help arrived. Zhao Weidong remained conscious and understood exactly how close the entire team had come to dying. Qingshan finally collapsed as adrenaline faded from his body. The older hunter admitted he had lost control during the chase, attacked too aggressively, and helped create the opening the bear used against them. His revenge obsession had produced the precise disaster Tiangyong predicted. Meanwhile, a completely different battle over Tiangyong's future was unfolding in Shungan's meeting room. Li Hongbing had gathered villagers to vote on the newcomer's building plot. Most supported the application, but Wang Dongjun complained about giving desirable land to someone he still called an outsider. Li shut that language down immediately. Because Tiangyong was now a registered Shungan resident, Accountant Liu added a sharper argument. Anyone who had eaten Tiangyong's free boar meat had little right to treat him as a stranger. Most hands went up without further discussion. Only a few chronic complainers held back until Yuan Xiao burst into the meeting with news of a dead bear and multiple injured hunters. Lai instantly switched from land paperwork to emergency rescue. He organized men, called for medical help, and watched several previous holdouts volunteer. The second they heard bear meat might need carrying, Li reminded them that the bear belonged to Tiangyong, the same outsider they had just resisted helping. The objection vanished immediately once free bear meat entered the discussion. By the time the rescue group reached the Red Pine Forest, Tiangyong's land vote had become unanimous without him being present. The village carried Li Jingkong, Qingshan, and Zhao Weidong on door panels because Shungan owned no proper stretchers. Stone went onto a cart, its eyes alert even though the lower body no longer responded. The wounded still needed official paperwork before receiving full treatment. Another reminder that bureaucracies did not disappear because someone was bleeding. At the village entrance, Lin Yuing waited among the worried crowd. The relief on her face when she saw Tiangyong walking under his own power was obvious enough that he noticed it even while exhausted. He gave her the bear paws and asked whether she could cook them. Yuing had never prepared bear paw in her life, but after one moment of surprise, she promised to learn. At the team office, villagers gathered around the carcass while Accountant Liu struggled to keep the distribution orderly. Once everyone understood Tiangyong had landed the killing shots, attention shifted from the famous Hunter King to the new hunter again. Tiangyong kept only 4 categories of trophy and medicine: the gallbladder, nose, kneecap bones, and all 4 paws. The remaining meat went to the village, with rescue workers receiving larger portions for the labor. The gallbladder proved to be the common grass type instead of the rarer copper pattern variety. Several villagers expressed more disappointment than Tiangyong felt because one visible gallbladder was not his real inventory. The hidden space had produced 100 bears from his personal kill. That meant 100 gallbladders now existed inside his head, along with an amount of meat almost impossible to sell openly. Dumping them onto one market would expose him or destroy the price, so patience mattered more than raw value. An experienced villager named Lu Bingrun showed Tiangyong how to locate the swollen organ and tie off the bile duct before removing it. Tiangyong memorized the procedure because mental processing meant he would repeat the same steps many times without an instructor. He thanked Lu Bingrun with 2 premium cigarettes, which delighted the older man almost as much as meat would have. After sending Yuan Xiao and Yuing home with the trophies, Tiangyong returned alone to the forest. He hung organs from a branch in accordance with mountain tradition and stood for a moment where the bear had fallen. Refusing King Shan's planned hunt had been correct. If Tiangyong had followed King Shan's original strategy from the start, he might have been lying on a door panel beside the others. At the same time, their failed battle created the opening that made his clean shot possible. Tiangyong decided to help the injured families with food and supplies, rather than pretend the victory belonged to him alone. Dinner waited at the youth quarters when he returned. Yuing had prepared food while Yuan Xiao apparently spent the evening criticizing his master's cooking ability. One glance at Yuing's suppressed smile told Tiangyong exactly what the boy had been saying. He ordered Yuan Xiao into horse stance again. The teenager appealed to Yuing for mercy, only to hear her agree that the training had already saved his life once. Yuan Xiao looked betrayed by the very girl he had been trying to match with his master. After his legs began shaking, Tiangyong finally let him sit. Yuing served him rice, and the exhausted boy accidentally addressed her as master's wife. The room went silent, long enough for everyone to feel the implication. Yuing turned crimson and glanced at Tiangyong. Tiangyong discovered that facing an angry boar was easier than processing one harmless sentence and escaped the house with the bare gallbladder. His destination was Lu Bingrun's home because the medicinal organ needed proper treatment before it could be sold. Lu Bingrun explained that the best gallbladders were tied off while the bear was still alive and never allowed to touch the ground. After removal, hunters wrapped them in linden bark, coated them with yellow clay, and air-dried them from roof beams. For higher-grade processing, Lu recommended sealing the organ inside hollow pine with beeswax and later combining the sediment with deer blood. Skipping those steps could cut the value by 20 to 30%. With 100 gallbladders hidden away, a small percentage difference could eventually mean thousands of yuan. Tiangyong asked where to find beeswax and deer blood. Lu Bingrun simply opened a cabinet and offered enough of both to process around 20 or 30 organs. To the older man, that quantity was excessive, because a normal hunter might never see that many bears in a lifetime. To Tiangyong, it covered less than 1/3 of the material already waiting inside his space. He accepted gratefully and planned to acquire the rest without revealing why he needed so much. That night, Tiangyong prepared the first gallbladder, according to Lu Bingrun's instructions. He hollowed a pine section, sealed the organ with beeswax, then looked for a hiding place safer than his crowded youth quarters. King Shan remained at the hospital, and his empty house offered an unlikely storage point. No one would connect to Tiangyong. He slipped inside after midnight, hid the sealed pine section along a roof beam, and left without disturbing anything else. The next morning, Ewing was already sweeping his courtyard again. Better meals had begun restoring faint color to her face, which confirmed that simple nutrition was helping at least part of her weakness. Tiangyong told her to use his kitchen whenever she needed and eat there, instead of pretending plain porridge was enough. She tried to refuse out of habit, then accepted when his tone made clear the argument was already over. Yuan Xiao arrived to find Tiangyong packing the 4 bear paws for another visit to Frozen Creek. The boy's excitement disappeared temporarily when Tiangyong made him finish stance training before they could leave. Ewing laughed at his suffering, with the easy familiarity of someone beginning to feel safe in the courtyard. On the walk to the lumber camp, Tiangyong received another piece of good news. His land permit had been approved for a 200 square meter building area and roughly 400 square meters including the yard. Plot sat on Shungan's northeast side not far from Wang Qingshan's home. Li Hongbing had pushed the application through while Tiangyong was dealing with the bear, quietly solving another long-term problem. At Frozen Creek, Wang Yutian's younger sons rushed toward Tiangyong's basket before they bothered greeting Yuan Xiao. The boy who had introduced them now ranked below the man associated with meat, which wounded his pride deeply. When Tiangyong revealed the bear paws, Dasha and Dadan stared as if they had been shown treasure from a storybook. Wang was still working, so Tiangyong passed the time, answering their questions about black bears and mountain safety. He stressed scent and wind direction because bear eyesight mattered far less than the animal's nose in close terrain. Wang returned, performed his usual sniff and freeze routine, and nearly assumed Tiangyong had killed another bear. Tiangyong corrected the misunderstanding and explained Qingshan's failed hunt, the ambush, and his own final shots. The story sobered Wang more than the trophy impressed him. Then Tiangyong raised the business matter he had actually come to discuss. 7 processed wild boars remained in his hidden inventory, and he wanted all 7 sold through Frozen Creek. Wang's voice cracked when he repeated the number. He started to ask where 7 entire boars had come from, met Tiangyong's expression, and wisely decided the source was none of his concern. They arranged a nighttime delivery to keep the transaction simple and separate from village attention. Tiangyong kept the tusks and bristles for other buyers, while Wang focused on moving meat and organs through the camp. Preparing the bear paws required extra ingredients, so Tiangyong volunteered to ride to the supply cooperative on a borrowed camp bicycle. The difference in wealth was immediate. Frozen Creek had several bicycles, while all of Shungan shared one. Tiangyong enjoyed the ride enough to make Shanliang's 10-boar bicycle bounty feel even more tempting. At the cooperative, Sister Zhang recognized him and brightened, despite remembering how much work his previous order had created. Tiangyong deliberately bought fewer categories this time, to avoid looking like a young man equipping an entire household overnight. Even his restrained list included salt, liquor, kerosene, rope, hunting supplies, rubber shoes, cigarettes, and several cans of malted milk powder. Sister Zhang gathered the better quality items again, then looked exhausted by the time the counter was covered. One compliment about the Shanghai hair clip restored her mood faster than any apology could have. Tiangyong loaded the bicycle, moved most goods into the hidden space on a quiet road, and returned with only the cooking ingredients visible. Wang Yutian transformed the bear paws with mushrooms and bamboo shoots until the gelatinous meat nearly melted off the bones. His sons and Yuan Xiao devoured the dish fast enough to prove expensive ingredients could still vanish like ordinary noodles. Tiangyong asked Wang to pack leftovers because he already knew exactly who would not have eaten lunch back in Shungan. Before leaving Frozen Creek, he used the bicycle to buy 200 jin of rice from the grain station. His household now effectively fed 3 people: himself, Ewing whenever she could be persuaded to eat, and Yuan Xiao whenever hunting brought him over. The ration system had stopped being his main limitation because hunting income now paid for food faster than he consumed it. At the youth quarters, Ewing was waiting near the kitchen and failed completely at pretending she had not been watching for him. She admitted she had not eaten. Tiangyong handed her the packed bear paw, and a brief touch between their fingers made her face turn bright red again. He returned the bicycle afterward and learned Wang Qingshan had finally come home from the hospital. Tiangyong assembled a visit package of rice, pheasants, eggs, and malted milk powder before heading over. Kingshan's house felt painfully empty, even with 2 living beings inside. Stone lay bandaged beside the bed, alert from the front shoulders and completely motionless behind them. The dog's spine was broken permanently. For Kingshan, Stone had been more than a hunting tool. After his wife's death, the animal became his closest companion and remaining family. Kingshan tried to refuse Tiangyong's gifts, insisting the bear belonged to the younger hunter who actually killed it. Tiangyong ignored the objection and stacked food in the corner until refusal became impossible. Hospital costs, injured teammates, and a disabled dog had left Kingshan with obligations his recent years of poor hunting could not cover. The supplies therefore functioned less like charity and more like breathing room. Then Kingshan made a different request. He wanted to join Tiangyong for the Shanling wild boar bounty once his wounds healed. This time the old revenge fever was absent. Kingshan wanted money to care for Stone and help the families of Li Jiankong and Zhao Weidong. Tiangyong thought back to the Red Pine fight. Even while emotionally unstable, Kingshan had rolled under a charging bear and landed an axe in its leg. The man was physically brave and skilled. His failure had come from the psychological wound tied specifically to bears. Killing the bear that haunted him might have changed that condition. Tiangyong also needed a strong frontline partner who could create openings while he secured the final shot required by the multiplier. He agreed to team up after Kingshan healed. The older hunter smiled hard enough to pull his chest wound and immediately regretted the movement. That night, Tiangyong handled the 7-boar delivery promised to Frozen Creek. Wang Yutian waited in a birch grove with a coworker named Bao Yu and 2 ox carts. Bao looked nervous until their flashlights revealed neat piles of processed pork large enough to fill both carts. Wang paid a 300 yuan deposit, while the rest would follow after official weighing at the camp. Tiangyong trusted the state enterprise enough to let the shipment move without counting every last note in the forest. He walked home alone after midnight, while the ox carts carried the shipment toward the camp for official weighing. At the youth quarters, he soaked his feet in hot water and finally counted his visible cash. The total reached 536 yuan and 80 fen. 2 weeks earlier, he had woken with no identity and not a single coin. Now his money, tickets, inventory, and sale channels would have made him wealthy by local standards even without counting one hidden bear. The numbers convinced him it was time to turn the approved land plot into a real home. Tiangyong went to Li Hongbing and announced that he wanted to start construction. Li nearly choked when Tiangyong placed 100 yuan on the table and asked what kind of house it could build. A rough straw structure was easy. Tiangyong wanted brick. Li warned that a brick house could become a disaster if funding stopped halfway, leaving expensive walls with no finished roof. Tiangyong told him to proceed and back the confidence with his growing hunting record rather than explaining hidden wealth. 2 packs of good cigarettes helped turn the discussion into concrete arrangements with builders and materials. Li agreed to supervise everything, while Tiangyong focused on hunting. Before leaving, Tiangyong mentioned Shanlong Commune and received a much colder reaction. Li described famous hunting groups already operating there, including skilled trackers, experienced shooters, and men with reputations built over decades. Even those teams were struggling with the boar crisis. His message was simple. Tiangyong had talent, but talent plus a borrowed gun and 1 teenage disciple did not equal an elite hunting company. Tiangyong listened respectfully and kept his disagreement private. 2 days later, the land permit carried its final stamp and construction planning began. For the next 10 days, however, Tiangyong barely hunted outside at all. He stayed inside and used the hidden space to process the 100 black bears created by his kill. Mental control allowed roughly 10 bears per day, before headaches warned him to stop. The work produced separated meat, hides, bones, paws, noses, and medicinal organs without anyone in Shungan seeing a single carcass arrive. What looked like laziness from outside was the most profitable butchering operation in the region. During that period, Wang Yutian delivered the remaining 700 yuan from the boar sale. Tiangyong paid Wang 50 yuan as the agreed percentage, enough to make the careful cook voluntarily buy drinks in celebration. The partnership had already earned Wang more from one deal than his original flat fee would have produced. Tiangyong also kept feeding Yuing better food whenever she came to help. Her face slowly filled out and regained color, while Yuanxiao complained that his share of snacks had declined sharply since she entered the routine. Tiangyong considered the complaint fair and ignored it anyway. Then, Song Jinzi sent word that the hunting puppy was ready. Tiangyong left for the black market, expecting to collect a promising animal for the future. He had no idea the puppy would unlock the next major function of his hidden space before the day ended. Song Jinzi led Tiangyong away from the market toward Paddy Flower Village, where the breeder lived far enough from neighbors to discourage casual visitors. 3 wooden cabins stood near the mountain, with almost nothing around them. but plants, dirt, and the sounds of dogs. The owner was an older man everyone called Elder Ching, a breeder whose reputation came from decades of raising hunting animals. At his peak, he had kept around 30 dogs. Then someone poisoned most of the pack, and the graves behind his house proved the story was not exaggeration. Each small mound marked an animal he had raised and buried himself. That history explained why Elder Ching reacted badly when Tiangyong arrived with his face covered. The old man had never learned who poisoned his dogs, but the people he remembered from that period had concealed their faces. To him, a masked stranger was not mysterious. It was an old threat walking back into his yard. Song Jinzi tried to smooth the meeting over and failed. Elder Ching declared that the mother dog would decide whether Tiangyong deserved the puppy. If she accepted him, the sale could proceed. If she rejected him, money and meat would not change the result. The mother was a massive Liuzhou red, broad through the chest, and built more like a fighting animal than an ordinary village dog. Her eyes followed Tiangyong from the instant he entered the enclosure. Behind her, the puppy was still small enough to disappear beneath the mother's body. Tiangyong approached slowly, turned slightly sideways, and avoided the direct aggressive posture that nervous animals often interpreted as a challenge. The mother rose anyway and shifted her body between Tiangyong and the puppy. Her ears came forward, lips pulled back, and every step Tiangyong took increased the tension in her body. Song Jinzi moved behind the doorway, rather than risk being involved if the test went wrong. Elder Ching watched with a hard expression, offering no instruction and no sign he intended to interfere. Another step brought Tiangyong close enough to see the dog preparing to launch. He needed a way to change the animal's assessment without revealing anything impossible. Then he remembered what his mental storage actually contained. 100 butchered black bears had filled the space with the scent of predator blood, more concentrated than anything a normal hunter could carry. Tiangyong opened the smallest possible connection between the hidden space and the outside air. Only a trace of bear blood scent escaped. The mother dog's reaction was immediate and complete. Her aggressive posture collapsed, tail tucked beneath her, and the animal broke eye contact, as if a much larger predator had entered the yard. Tiangyong closed the connection before Elder Ching could identify the source. He placed a hand on the dog's head. The Liuzhou red accepted the contact without resistance. Then the mother turned, picked up her puppy gently by the scruff, and placed it directly into Tiangyong's hands. Elder Ching stopped looking suspicious and started looking confused. Song Jinzi leaned around the doorway because he could not believe the breeder's fiercest dog had voluntarily surrendered her pup. Tiangyong understood the answer, even if nobody else did. To the mother, he suddenly smelled like something standing above bears in the food chain. The puppy trembled in his hands, which worried Tiangyong for a different reason. Courage mattered in a hunting dog, and he did not want one brief scent trick to turn an elite bloodline into a permanently frightened pet. Tiangyong asked Song Jinzi to wait outside and removed his mask. He gave Elder Ching his real name, told him he was a registered hunter from Shungan, and stopped hiding behind the gang fiction. The old man's attitude changed immediately. Directness mattered to him because masks had become connected with betrayal and dead dogs. Elder Ching admitted he had intentionally let the mother become more aggressive as a test. He had wanted the concealed stranger to fail before the sale could happen. Instead, the mother had treated Tiangyong like a pack leader. The result forced Elder Ching to reconsider everything he had assumed. He showed Tiangyong the graves and explained that 22 dogs had died in the poisoning years earlier. Those animals had been working partners, not inventory. Tiangyong's respect for the breeder grew because grief had made him difficult, not careless. Elder Ching then brought out a wooden box containing equipment for the puppy. Inside were a deerbone whistle designed not to freeze in winter, a tough leather collar treated with bear oil, and 2 iron dog spikes. The collar was meant to protect the throat during fights with wolves and boars. The whistle could carry commands in conditions where a hunter's voice might fail. The equipment represented knowledge accumulated over years, not simply objects bought from a stall. Elder Ching said the puppy's parents were his best 2 remaining hunters and believed the young animal could surpass both. His only demand was that Tiangyong not waste that potential. Tiangyong promised he would not. Outside, Song Jinzi tried to read both men's faces and wisely decided not to ask what had changed inside. The account settled exactly as agreed. No bicycle ticket had appeared, which surprised nobody. Tiangyong carried the tiny puppy back toward Shungan, with one hand supporting its warm body. At the youth quarters, he placed it on the floor and watched it crawl around the room sniffing everything. The pup finally pressed against his shoe and whimpered. The sight triggered an inconvenient problem. Even the best bloodline would need months of growth, training, and conditioning before entering a serious hunt. Tiangyong needed a capable dog for Shanliang now, not a year later. As he considered the delay, the hidden space began vibrating in a way he had never felt before. The sensation carried information rather than pain. Hangyang focused inward and discovered that the space was offering a new method involving the processed bear meat. Chunks of bear flesh began moving without his command. The meat compressed, folded inward, and reduced until a dense red pill formed from an enormous amount of material. The space somehow communicated the function directly. A hunting dog that ate the pill could accelerate growth without the normal developmental cost. Several pills could take a newborn animal to full maturity in a single day. Tiangyong stared at the tiny object and understood that the multiplier had just become much more than a food-producing cheat. The puppy smelled the pill before Tiangyong finished thinking through the risk. It lunged upward, licked the medicine from his fingers, and swallowed. The transformation started almost immediately. Bones lengthened, muscles filled out, ears rose, and the small puppy expanded through months of growth in seconds. When the process stopped, an animal's around century-old stood where the nursing pup had been. Its coat had begun shifting from dark puppy fur toward a rusty red inherited from the Liuzhou line. Tiangyong checked for pain, deformity, or obvious weakness and found none. The young dog looked at him with bright focus, then leaned into his hand with the same trust it had shown as a baby. Tiangyong established simple authority before risking more pills. He told the dog that Tiangyong was its master and expected obedience. The animal nodded with enough intention to erase any doubt about comprehension. Not tilted its head, not reacted randomly. It gave a deliberate human-like nod. The accelerated growth had apparently improved cognition as well as the body. Tiangyong tested the possibility with basic commands. Sit produced an immediate clean response. When told to retrieve the rubber shoes from beneath the bed, the dog found the correct pair and returned them with thin seconds. Its intelligence was far beyond normal puppy behavior. That made the new pills potentially more dangerous than the multiplier itself if anyone discovered them. Hunters would kill for medicine that created fully mature, unusually intelligent working dogs in hours. Tiangyong decided nobody could ever watch the feeding process. He named the dog Red King. The animal answered with an excited bark and a tail strong enough to strike the floor. Tiangyong produced another pill and fed it deliberately. Red King grew again, chest widening while the red in his coat brightened. A third dose deepened the color toward a vivid sunset tone and produced a dark stripe along the spine. Protective mane-like fur thickened around the neck, where wolves normally targeted a dog during combat. A fourth dose pushed the animal beyond the size of its mother. The final adult form carried dense muscle without looking slow, a balance of strength and athletic movement that Tiangyong had rarely seen. 4 pills in total had taken a newborn puppy to an elite adult hunting dog in roughly 20 minutes. The adult Red King looked intimidating until Tiangyong called his name. Then the huge animal dropped at his feet with the expression of the same baby that had pressed against his shoe. Tiangyong laughed and decided field testing could not wait. A dog built from elite bloodlines, magical acceleration, and enhanced intelligence needed to prove whether those advantages translated into real hunting. He chose Old Baldy Peak, roughly 10 miles from Shungan, because game around the village had become too scarce. Wang Qingshan had previously mentioned roe deer in that area. Roe deer offered speed and scent work without the immediate suicidal danger of sending a new dog after a mature boar. The second Red King entered the forest. His entire posture changed. The affectionate pet disappeared behind a working animal, whose ears, nose, and body scanned different layers of the terrain. He ranged ahead, doubled back, tested wind currents, and used far more space than a yard dog would have understood naturally. Tiangyong kept the deerbone whistle ready and followed from a distance. Only now did he calculate the real cost of the pills. Each dose consumed an enormous quantity of bear meat, making a fully grown dog worth thousands of yuan in hidden resources. That number sounded absurd until Red King suddenly froze and lifted his nose. One bark told Tiangyong the dog had found fresh scent. Red King launched between the trees faster than Tiangyong could comfortably follow. By the time Tiangyong reached the next opening, a roe deer was pinned beneath the dog's front paws. Its throat was punctured enough to control it, but not enough to kill it. Red King had somehow left the final strike for his master. Tiangyong used the hunting knife once. The deer died, and 100 copied roe deer appeared inside the hidden space. That confirmed the dog could support the multiplier perfectly by capturing prey without taking the final kill. One deer already recovered a meaningful portion of the pill cost. Red King pressed his enormous head against Tiangyong's leg and whined until the hunter understood the request. The dog wanted another pill as a reward. Tiangyong held up 4 fingers to represent the doses already spent and told him he still owed 3 deer before earning another. Red King appeared to understand the debt. He turned immediately and resumed scenting. The way he tracked was as valuable as the first capture. The deer test also confirmed Red King's temperament around Tiangyong. The huge dog never challenged a command even when prey, blood, and the red pills pushed his excitement high. That obedience mattered, because strength without control would make him dangerous inside Shungan. Tiangyong planned to expose him gradually to villagers, livestock, and normal household noise, before relying on him around crowds. A hunting dog had to know when not to hunt. The deerbone whistle from Elder Qing became part of that training immediately. Tiangyong used different calls for return, stop, and direction changes while Red King ranged through the trees. The dog learned the pattern with almost no repetition. That gave Tiangyong a control method that would still work across wind, brush, and gunfire. Elder Qing's equipment had therefore become valuable faster than the breeder could have predicted. The treated collar protected the throat, where wolves or boars might grab during close combat. The iron spikes remained unused on the first deer hunt because Tiangyong wanted to understand the dog's natural movement before adding more gear. Nothing about the afternoon required forcing Red King into danger. The animal's speed alone let him catch prey that would have escaped a human hunter easily. Tiangyong's own role became cleaner: follow, choose the safe moment, and take the final strike. That division of labor preserved ammunition too. Roe deer did not require bullets if Red King could pin them alive. Every cartridge saved could later matter against boars, bears, or emergencies where a knife was not an option. The hidden multiplier rewarded final kills, but it also rewarded efficiency around those kills. Red King improved both sides of that hunting equation at once. When the dog returned from each chase, Tiangyong checked pause, breathing, gait, and any sign of strain. The magically accelerated body looked mature, but Tiangyong refused to assume it was indestructible. No injury appeared after miles of hard running. The reward pill erased fatigue without making the dog disoriented or aggressive. Those observations were encouraging, not permission to stop being careful. Tiangyong had learned from the bear hunt what happened when confidence replaced judgment. Red King's first successful day ended because the test had answered every important question. He could track prey through conditions that defeated ordinary human signs. He could catch fast animals without forcing Tiangyong into reckless chases. He could restrain without killing. He could obey at distance. And he could keep working far longer than an ordinary young dog. That was enough proof to bring him into the next stage of Tiangyong's hunting life. Most hunting dogs relied heavily on ground trails, which became difficult when autumn leaves covered tracks and scattered scent. Red King worked airborne scent against the wind. That rare ability let him locate animals without touching their original path, making season and ground condition far less restrictive. Within 2 hours, he located and pinned 2 more roe deer. Tiangyong finished both, bringing the hidden total to 300 copies from the afternoon. After several miles of running, Red King still showed almost no fatigue. Tiangyong told him 1 deer remained before the promised reward. The dog practically smiled, then disappeared through the trees with renewed effort. A 4th roe deer fell to the same pattern: chase, restraint, waiting for Tiangyong's final strike. The teamwork felt less like training a new animal, and more like working beside a partner that already understood the system's most important condition. Tiangyong produced 1 red pill and tossed it upward as payment. Red King caught it cleanly and swallowed before it touched the ground. No dramatic growth followed, because the dog had already reached maturity. Instead, visible fatigue disappeared within moments. Tiangyong checked the teeth and claws and noticed they had become slightly thicker and sharper as well. Post-maturity pills were not useless. They restored energy and continued making smaller physical improvements after the main growth phase ended. That created a dangerous temptation to keep feeding them without limit. Tiangyong refused to spend bear stock casually until he understood how much improvement was actually safe and worthwhile. 4 roe deer in 1 afternoon already proved Red King was worth the investment. He mentally processed the animals, left a traditional offering from the organs, and turned back toward Shungan before dark. Near the village, Tiangyong withdrew enough venison to fill 2 baskets. He suspended them from a carrying pole, so anyone watching would see a believable hunter returning with meat rather than an empty man hiding impossible storage. Red King walked beside him with perfect calm, despite carrying enough muscle to frighten anyone unfamiliar with the breed. Red King's sudden maturity created a practical problem Tiangyong had to solve before anyone else saw him. A newborn puppy had left Elder Qing's yard. An adult dog could not appear in Shungan the same afternoon without inviting questions from Song Jinzi, Yuan Xiao, or anyone who remembered the purchase. Tiangyong therefore avoided the black market route home and kept the animal away from crowded roads during the transformation. By the time Red King entered public view, Tiangyong could simply say he had acquired a trained Liuzhou Red through hunting contacts. That explanation was unusual but believable. Song Jinzi did not need to know his nursing puppy had become this animal. Elder Ching definitely did not need to see a months-old pup return as an adult before sunset. Protecting the new pill secret required even tighter control than protecting multiplied meat. Meat could be hidden, butchered, sold far away, or explained as group hunting. A dog that aged a year in one day could walk beside witnesses and expose the impossible directly. Tiangyong decided every future pill use would happen alone. He also began counting bear stock differently. Before Red King, bear meat was merchandise. After Red King, part of it became strategic material, capable of creating or strengthening working animals. That changed the opportunity cost of every sale. Selling 100 jin of bear meat for cash might be a bad deal if the same amount could improve a dog that produced hundreds of future kills. Tiangyong had to compare immediate money against hunting capacity, not just market price. Red King's first field test made the answer clearer. The dog did not simply find deer. He managed the chase intelligently enough to keep prey alive for Tiangyong's final strike. That behavior preserved the multiplier without needing repeated commands. Whether Red King understood the system itself or merely understood his master's pattern remained unclear. Tiangyong did not waste time trying to solve a mystery that already worked in his favor. He reinforced the behavior with praise and rewards. When Red King pinned instead of killing, he was rewarded. When he returned on command, he was rewarded. When he waited for Tiangyong's knife, he was rewarded. The dog learned the desired hunting structure within one afternoon. That speed made Yuan Xiao look even slower by comparison. A comparison Tiangyong wisely kept to himself. The airborne scent ability mattered even more than obedience. Old Baldy Peak had ground covered in fallen leaves that broke visible tracks and scattered weaker scent trails. Red King repeatedly lifted his head instead of pressing his nose to the soil. He sampled wind layers, changed direction, then accelerated only when the airborne trail strengthened. Tiangyong recognized the method from old hunting knowledge and understood why experienced hunters valued it so highly. A ground-tracking dog followed where an animal had been. Red King could work toward where the animal was now. That difference shortened chases and reduced the chance of stumbling blindly into dangerous terrain. It also made winter less important. Tiangyong had previously complained that lack of snow left him nearly blind to tracks. Red King removed much of that seasonal disadvantage. Shanliang's boar crisis suddenly looked more manageable for one specific reason. Finding animals would no longer depend entirely on human tracking. The dog could locate prey before human trackers ever found a clear sign. Kingshan could read terrain and handle close pressure. Tiangyong could choose the firing position and final shot. Yuan Xiao could learn support work from a safer distance. That was a functioning structure, rather than one talented shooter improvising everything. The roe deer also improved Tiangyong's understanding of how to reward Red King. The dog clearly desired the red pills beyond normal food. Tiangyong refused to make them casual treats. Each dose represented huge hidden value and unknown long-term effects. He turned them into performance rewards instead, tying one pill to several successful hunts. Red King accepted that arrangement because his enhanced intelligence seemed able to understand simple counting and debt. The scene would have looked absurd to anyone else. A hunter explaining repayment terms to a giant red dog. Inside the team, it worked. After the reward pill removed fatigue, Tiangyong saw another strategic possibility. A normal hunting dog eventually needed rest after repeated chases. Red King could potentially recover in the field almost instantly. That meant a long hunt might be limited by Tiangyong's own stamina before the dog's. He still refused to test the limit recklessly. The pills were new, and no system message explained what unlimited use might do over months. Tiangyong's advantage had always been strongest when paired with restraint. The first space expansion proved that uncontrolled use could consume valuable inventory without warning. He had no intention of learning another hidden cost by feeding Red King until something went wrong. The 4-deer hunt therefore ended while both partners were still capable of continuing. Tiangyong preferred leaving prey in the forest to turning one successful test into an avoidable accident after dark. Before heading back, he separated organs for the mountain offering. Exactly as local hunters had taught him, the ritual did not require him to share every old belief. It reminded him that hunting had rules older than his arrival, and that taking from the mountain carried responsibility. Red King sat quietly while Tiangyong finished, already learning that the end of a hunt included waiting. On the return path, Tiangyong chose how much venison to display. Too little would make the huge dog's usefulness look disappointing. Too much would raise the same questions as every other impossible haul. 2 heavy baskets created the right story. A gifted new dog had helped a skilled hunter find good game. The rest stayed hidden inside the expanded mental storage. At the building site, Li Fusheng's concern about money was not disrespect. Brick, timber, roof material. Doors, labor meals, and transport could swallow cash faster than one successful hunt produced it. Several village houses had been planned ambitiously and finished cheaply after the owner ran short. Li Hongbing did not want that embarrassment attached to a newcomer whose permit he had personally defended. Tiangyong understood the concern and chose proof instead of promises. The venison could feed builders immediately. Future meat sales could pay material costs. Cash already existed for deposits. The hidden inventory remained the reserve nobody else needed to know about. Construction itself strengthened Tiangyong's position in Shungan. A young man building a permanent brick house looked less like someone waiting for a chance to flee. Villagers, who had wondered whether he would disappear after a few months, now saw stakes in the ground. That visual commitment supported the reputation Li Hongbing had defended at the land meeting. The house also solved future storage camouflage. A larger kitchen, yard, locked rooms, and normal household supplies would make movement of goods easier to explain. Tiangyong did not need the physical building for the hidden space. He needed it for the life surrounding the hidden space. Ewing would have a cleaner place to cook. Yuanxiao could train without treating abandoned youth quarters as permanent headquarters. Red King would need a proper kennel and secure yard. Future hunting equipment could hang on visible walls rather than appear mysteriously when required. A permanent home, therefore, served every part of Tiangyong's strategy at once: social legitimacy, relationships, equipment, and concealment. When Li Hongbing looked from Red King to the venison and then back to the marked foundation, his uncertainty eased. Tiangyong did not need to boast about having enough money. The hunter, the dog, and the meat were already answering for him. The building plot came into view. Before Tiangyong reached his current quarters, Li Hongbing was supervising his cousin Li Fusheng and 7 men as they marked the future foundation with stakes and rope. None of the laborers were receiving normal wages. In the village economy, a household often repaid construction help by providing food, and the promise of meals made neighbors eager to participate. Li Fusheng quietly asked whether the newcomer could really afford a brick house through completion. The concern was reasonable because nobody except Li Hongbing knew how much money Tiangyong had begun earning. Liney defended the project but did not sound completely certain himself. Then Tiangyong appeared carrying 2 heavy baskets of fresh venison with Red King beside him. Li Hongbing's first reaction was not to the meat. He stared at the enormous red dog and asked what kind of animal Tiangyong had brought into the village. Tiangyong introduced Red King as his new hunting dog and named the Liuzhou Red bloodline, without explaining the impossible growth. Red King sat when told and regarded Li calmly instead of showing aggression. That obedience slowly convinced the team leader he was looking at a working dog rather than a threat to children and livestock. Then Li noticed the carrying pole bending under the meat. The answer to Li Fusheng's construction concern had arrived in 2 baskets. Li Fusheng looked at the venison again and stopped asking whether the next construction meal could be covered. The other workers noticed too, but nobody rushed the baskets or asked for a share before Tiangyong offered anything. That restraint mattered to him. The village had accepted his generosity without turning it into entitlement, which made future generosity much easier. Tiangyong told Li Hongbing to use part of the venison for the construction crew. Feeding the men well would keep the work moving and repay neighbors whose labor replaced wages his project would otherwise require. Li immediately began calculating how many meals the visible meat could support. Tiangyong let him calculate only what he could see. The hidden copies meant the food budget was far safer than the team leader imagined. Red King drew a second circle of attention as children began appearing at a cautious distance. The dog's size intimidated them until Tiangyong gave a sit command, and Red King obeyed without moving a paw afterward. No barking, lunging, or chasing followed. That calm control did more to reassure parents than any description of the breed. Tiangyong planned a proper kennel as part of the new yard, rather than letting such a powerful animal wander freely. A hunting partner needed rest, feeding, training space, and clear boundaries around village livestock. The house design was therefore changing before the first brick had even been laid. What began as a roof over one time traveler's head was becoming the base for a real hunting household. Li Hongbing saw that shift and stopped treating the project like a fragile experiment. He began discussing timber, brick deliveries, roofing, and which neighbors could help with each stage. Tiangyong listened because construction was another field where future knowledge did not replace local experience. The best plan was still to let people who knew the village solve village problems. His role was to provide enough resources that their solutions were not strangled by scarcity. That was exactly what the venison represented at the edge of the foundation. One successful afternoon with Red King could feed workers, generate saleable meat, and proved the new dog was already earning its place. The multiplier turned the same 4 deer into far more hidden value, but the visible result alone was enough to move Tiangyong's life forward. Tiangyong could fund labor meals immediately and sell the multiplied venison elsewhere for much more. More importantly, Red King had solved the tracking weakness that kept Tiangyong from entering deeper hunting territory. The brick house was finally moving from stamped paperwork to physical foundation. The hunter beside it now had legal identity, multiple sale channels, a growing cash reserve, a reliable dog, and enough hidden game to finance the next stage. Shanlang Commune's wild boar bounty no longer looked like reckless ambition. With Red King able to find and hold prey, Wang Qingshan preparing to join after recovery, and Tiangyong controlling the killing shot, it looked achievable. The newcomer who had arrived with one name and no past was no longer trying merely to survive Shungan. He had built the tools to choose what came next, and the first stakes of his permanent home were already in the ground.